This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme Sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme sound. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber programme.
I've had no apologies. Obviously, we're all here, which is good and so. And does anybody wish to have a delegate authority if anybody's slipping out later on? No. Okay, thank you. Any declarations of interests? Nope. Moving on to the next item of the business, item 3, Chairperson's business, non-domestic rates valuations coronavirus bill. Members, the non-domestic rates valuations coronavirus bill passed its second stage on Tuesday and was referred to this committee for its committee stage. The committee stage is due to end on the 25th of January 2022. It is assumed that the committee does not wish to seek an extension. Are members content to seek evidence on the bill on Monday the 6th of December afternoon and to endeavour to hear from Hospitality Ulster, Northern Ireland Hotels Federation, Federation of Small Businesses, Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce, Retail NI, Nilga Solus, and then to hear from the Department undertake clause-by-clause scrutiny on Tuesday the 14th of December in the afternoon. And therefore we could agree, as we said to the Minister, we would expedite this process throughout to get to report through on the sort of the 5th of January if we were content. Matthew, go ahead.
Well, first of all, I agree we should expedite the process, having given that undertaking. I think that was a legitimate point raised by the Minister, and I just wonder if, in addition to that, do we want to seek either written or oral evidence from the Fiscal Council? Now, part of that would be asking them whether they feel that it's appropriate for them to give evidence, but it may be that they, it may be that they say it's not. It might be that they just want to put down. I feel a lot of our evidence is from business stakeholders, and we need to hear from them. But we also, given
the rates,
a significant part of this question, what we're addressing here is the question of fiscal risk and the tax base. Are we getting rich enough evidence on that side?
Did the committee correct my memory? Wasn't it mentioned by Ian Snowden that they consulted with or they had exit advice from? Was the
Yes, they did.
Somebody remind me of what it was. It was something that was evaluations.
Oh, the Commissioner of Valuations.
Is that what it was?
I think that's someone who's. Is that?
Well, let's check the Hansard record so we've got it right of what was the actual sort of organisation. But it might be useful to ask. I was thinking about asking them as well to come and either give written information or to come and speak with us.
Chairperson.
If we are content.
Content.
Great.
Just to, sorry, I think Mr. Alistair wants to come in, sir.
Sorry, Jim. Sorry, I didn't see your hand up there.
Did you say we would meet the department on the Tuesday rather than the Wednesday?
Yes, we'll do some additional sessions. I think the proposal is, Jim.
So members.
Okay, I just want clarity. Yeah.
Okay.
So just to clarify, we will need additional meetings. Thursday's no good, particularly for the Sinn Féin members who are all on committees. I think Philip's on maybe 2 that day. So the only other time is really Monday or Tuesday. Tuesday, the 6th of December will be, sorry, the 7th of December will be the consideration stage of the financial reporting bill. It's also finance questions. So really that's why it's Monday the 6th. It's also the case, Chair, that I'll certainly write to those organisations. We did find it difficult to get them to respond to us before. So I will do my very best to get those two right back to us and to give us oral evidence as well. But they might just come and give oral evidence. But I will try my level best to get them to come back on this timescale.
Okay. Can I just ask Clark, do you mean that you already wrote to the Fiscal Council, or do you mean Hospitality Ulster, FSB, etc.?
We contacted FSB, the Chamber of Commerce, and the Chamber of Commerce wouldn't respond, and the FSB gave us a limited response, which members saw before. But I think they were not quite, to be fair, they were not conversant with the bill. They were kind of surprised when we wrote to them. So we'll see what they say this time.
Yeah, sorry. Keith, you want to come in there?
Yeah, so you planned all that on the one day, all those are...
Yes.
Yep.
Fair enough.
Yes, sir. Well, what else will we do?
What time is the Monday meeting?
Say again, Jim.
What time are we talking about in those days?
2:15 in the Senate, and it would be a hybrid meeting like this one.
Yeah, going to
Is the I think that Monday's the day of John Bear's private members bill, which I certainly wish to make a contribution, but maybe I've got that date wrong.
Okay. Well, so that we can move on from the agenda item, we'll take that and we'll examine that and see if there's any other sort of issues that are due to come up in that particular time. Melissa, you want to come in?
Is that both days 2:15
Yes.
for the 6th and the 14th?
Yep.
Yes.
So are we, next item, Peter, you wanted to talk to about talking to the examiner's statutory rules?
Yes, Chairperson, if the committee is content for me to, on behalf of the committee, to write to the examiner's statutory rules and ask her to comment on the limited delegated powers that are associated with this bill. If that
Are we agreed?
Yeah.
Agreed. Thank you, Peter.
Sorry, Chair. Okay, yeah, so it's the Hunting of Wild Mammals bill is what the member's talking about. It's
Second stage?
It is, and I'm not sure what to do about this. I mean, there's going to be no good day to do this. So,
Jim, if you would be content, I would like to go ahead and sort of take the evidence if we could, because we have made a commitment to having voted down accelerated passage. We have made a commitment to go through the process. So I'm sure that you could come in and come out after having made your contribution to the hunting of the dogs bill.
it's Hunting of Wild Mammals bill. It's
Hunting of Wild Mammals
indicative
bill.
time is 1:30, so it does clash, and Jim would probably be fairly down the speaking list. So,
Okay.
okay.
Yeah, we'll have to work around it as best we can. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Jim. I mean, the next item on the agenda, 3.2, city deals. As members are aware, the spending review document provided confirmation in respect of 40 million of funding for city deals during the period 22-25. It is understood that the Department's interim permanent secretary may be the senior responsible officer for these important projects. Actually, I know we've all read, like good members of the Finance Committee that we have, but there was a very interesting comment in here that was about city deals that said even though that we had 40 million, we give 20 million of it back because we weren't able to spend it, which is reported in this document. So I think I would quite like to write to the department seeking confirmation of the above and an update in city deals on a breakdown of how the spending is being allocated. I mean, I was quite surprised to discover that our minister is the SRO for the city deals. I presumed it might have been something to do with the Minister for Economy, but no, it's our minister working with the Minister for the Economy. So I'd just like that to have a sort of a breakdown, sort of seeking confirmation of how that is led out, how the funding is led out, and indeed understanding sort of the interrelationship between the pieces, because I don't think it's come on our horizon that we're responsible indeed for looking at city deals, but more than delighted to get some further information on it, if we're agreed.
Chair, just on that, there's a document that went to the Economy Committee, Matthew, correct me, breaking that down, but some areas it's not exactly showing what's going where as yet, but obviously that document can be refreshed, but it's out there.
Yeah.
So the information's there.
It does seem a bit strange that we're in a situation where you would want to have a single point of contact who would be the responsible person for it, an accountable person for it, and understanding, looking at the financing as it is laid out, there's a considerable amount of money, as I understand it, is going to universities and other areas. So we've got monies going between potentially departments, between sort of local government and back. It sort of covers both Belfast and other areas, and also includes Londonderry and Strabane and the sort of the city deals area there as well. And you know, I must admit, I was the amount of money is quite considerable.
Yeah.
But I've never had it seen. I've never had it broken down or reported on, or the rest of it. And I think it would be quite important that we do that. Bearing in mind we don't have much left of this mandate, and we need to spend this. We need to get the City Deals programme moving. If we're content, thank you. Next item on the agenda, 3.3, is the Fiscal Council. Members asked to note that I met informally with the Fiscal Council as agreed on Tuesday. Related correspondence is the tabled items which we'll consider later. Is the committee content to note? Content. Thank you. The draft minutes of proceedings, the draft minutes of the Finance Committee meeting of the 17th of November are at page 7. And are members content with the draft minutes are an accurate record of proceedings? Are we agreed? Agreed. Agreed. Thank you. No matters arising. Thank you very much indeed. Move on to the next item of the agenda. Can we invite Jayne, Colin, Bill and Gillian?
They're just in the under there. So.
Have you read your correspondence, the Honourable Member for South Belfast?
I sure have, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And thank you to the clerk for expeditiously distributing it to members of the committee.
I'll not steal your thunder. Come on in, Jane. How are you?
Good.
Thank you. Thanks.
Nice to meet you.
How are you doing?
Just a confusion.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Jane. Welcome, Colin. Welcome, Bill. Welcome, Jill. Can you all hear us?
Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. We're now receiving oral briefing from, and first of all, congratulations on the job.
Thank you very much.
And sort of welcome from stepping out of the frying pan into the proverbial fryer. And thank you very much indeed for taking the time and coming along to talking to us as well. Our sort of main focus in this session, team, is we're talking about the RHI action plan, the sort of the NICS issues that come out from it as well. And we've got in front of us a sort of, is it Dr. Jayne, or do you want?
I prefer Jayne, if that's okay.
Jayne, happy with that. Jayne, who's the new head of the Civil Service. Colin, who we've met before, interim permanent secretary of the Department of Finance. Bill, who's the director of strategic policy, and Jill, who's head of HR, and the rest of it. Welcome to it. Relevant papers are as follows. Peter's briefing note on page 19. Minister's briefing on NICS reform on page 29. Ministerial correspondence relating to the review of recruitment and selection at page 31. Memorandum of reply, capacity and capability in the NICS at page 35. Ministerial correspondence relating to the RHI action plan, including the MOU with the TEO at page 147. RHI action plan and executive responses at page 154. RHI Lessons Learned Report 2018 at page 232. An additional table item at page 3, which is the letter to do that as well. Jayne, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just want to check you can all hear me. Okay.
Yeah.
Really delighted to have the opportunity to be here, and thank my colleagues as well from Department of Finance who've also joined me. I've just prepared some oral briefing, if that's okay,
yes,
just to bring you through, and then we can get into some discussions. Given the importance of our work across the civil service and the wider public sector, I look forward to hearing your views as to what works, as well as hearing from you about what could work better. There are a number of crucial areas where I hope we will be able to work closely together with you, perhaps most prominently the work to strengthen our civil service and to prepare it for the future. I've looked forward to my appearance today at the committee, and I'm familiar with being accountable to reporting to shareholders and to investors and stakeholders, and I know the benefit and that sort of constructive scrutiny and challenge can provide, so I welcome your input today. In my role as Secretary to the Executive and Head of the Service, I see an opportunity to rethink what we do and how we do it. I'm determined to bring new energy and ideas to each of these crucial functions. I want to set out a positive agenda today for how we can move forward. As I know you'll appreciate, we're at a critical point in our history, a time in which decisions taken now will affect generations to come. Given the importance of our work across the service and the wider public sector, I look forward to hearing your views as to what works and what could work better. It is my intention to work hard in support of the Executive, both to deliver this mandate and to prepare for the next one. Part of that will be about paying attention to the transformation and the modernisation of our civil service. As you may have noted, my experience has been largely in the private sector. I've worked for 25 years in large multinationals, spending significant time overseas. I've worked in start-up companies. I've also spent 7 years as a partner in a venture capital fund. But most recently, over the last 18 months, I have worked as Belfast Digital Innovation Commissioner. In that role, I saw the impact of the global pandemic together, the critical need to deliver a recovery plan that works for everyone. Unprecedented though it is, the pandemic is just one of the significant challenges we face. We need to rebuild in the wake of COVID and also tackle the systemic difficulties which already existed in our systems. Moments of discontinuity such as we are experiencing also provide a platform for delivering change, for embracing opportunities to transform and opportunities to improve our services and our economy. And I was keen to take up this role, having observed the way in which the Northern Ireland Civil Service adapted to the complexities and challenges in the last 20 months, supporting the restoration of the new executive, the negotiations, legislation and operational arrangements for EU exit, and a response to the pandemic. In taking forward this huge and vitally important programme of work, the service demonstrated agility, resilience and public service motivation. Moments of disruption, such as we have experienced, can shine a light on opportunities for new thinking, specifically on how we do business and how we can deliver the civil service of the future. We want to make the civil service a more attractive, diverse and inclusive place to work, while continuing to deliver and enhance services to our customers in addressing the challenges ahead. The agenda I want to pursue will build on these qualities, learning from the new ways of working which we developed during the pandemic, developing and enhancing our strengths. But at the same time, I am conscious that we must also give serious attention to those areas where our performance has not always been what we or the public would wish. In particular, we need to act on the findings of the RHI inquiry and deliver against its recommendations. Similarly, we must also address the recommendations of the PAC report into civil service capability and capacity. I give you my assurance that I am committed to doing this. But equally, I do not want the process of growing and developing our civil service to be wholly defined by these things. Change cannot simply come from reacting to the past. It must also come through positive action to face the future. We all want a modern, innovative civil service with diverse people and skills, one better equipped to meet the challenges of the future and to serve the Executive and the Assembly and our communities more effectively. I want to build on these qualities, to learn from the new ways of working which we developed, but I am conscious we also must address those areas where their performance has not been as the public would wish. Having met with a range of colleagues right across the system, it is clear to me there is a real and genuine appetite in the service for reform and improvement. I am the chair of the Northern Ireland Civil Service Board. I know we want to deliver a modern, innovative civil service with diverse people and skills, one better equipped to meet the challenges of the future and to serve the Executive, our communities and the Assembly more effectively. And we have already started, including many aspects called out in the PAC review. Since my appointment, we have reconstituted the Northern Ireland Civil Service Board. As identified in the PAC recommendations, we have new terms of reference and we have a refreshed mission to lead and to deliver change. I will refer to it subsequently. We have also established plans to open up the service and to recruit external members to the Northern Ireland Civil Service Board to offer independent scrutiny and expert advice. Again, another PAC recommendation. I have also launched competitions to appoint up to three new permanent secretaries through a refreshed and open recruitment process, and have been very encouraged by the significant support we have had in terms of applications. We're also developing schemes to increase diversity within the civil service workforce, including undergraduate, graduate and apprenticeship programmes, and trialling some of the programmes we have worked with partners such as assured skill programmes and operating those at scale. But we also need to look beyond the service. At the core of my approach to this transformation will be partnership and co-design, which I believe is key to our future and again identified in RHI and PAC findings. I want to ensure that we have access to the best ideas and thinking out there, and the way to do that is to build networks and partnerships and to be open-minded and inclusive. And although I would love to do more, I have been able to get out and engage with a range of people to share ideas and stimulate new thinking. Through these conversations and the many more to come, I will explore how in transforming the service as a means to an end of better serving the Executive, the Assembly and improving the lives of our citizens, the people you represent, through investment in high-value public services. Looking outwards means more than simply reaching out beyond the civil service. It also means taking our place in the world as part of a global community. My recent attendance at COP26 reinforced that, more than at any other time in history, there is a need to work as a global community of partners for mutual benefit and growth. I will bring my experience of living and working in China, North America and Germany, combined with my background in securing investment cases, to amplify the opportunities with our international relations teams in bringing strategic investment cases forward. As I'm sure you will all agree, there is much to do. With the Northern Ireland Civil Service Board, I will leverage the best of the civil service to support the Executive and deliver meaningful change for our communities. To build this programme, I've engaged with the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, with ministerial colleagues throughout the Executive, and with colleagues at all levels throughout the systems, and with a range of other external stakeholders. As I set out for the TEO committee, 4 clear themes have emerged. Firstly, delivery, including achieving the goals of the COVID recovery plan and advancing the programme for government, but also identifying a small number of cross-cutting, long-term strategic priorities and maximising the opportunities provided by multi-year budgets to think more strategically. Secondly, transformation of the Northern Ireland Civil Service, which I have already described. Thirdly, innovate. Through my experience in engineering and finance, I know the power of innovation and intelligent risk-taking. We need to be more innovative in our approaches. We need to use data and analytics more effectively. In policy making, we need access to the best advice and information, and we need to be ready to seize the opportunities emerging in the modern world. And finally, communication and collaboration. I want to improve the way we communicate with our partners and stakeholders. I want co-production to be at the core of how we do business. I also want to do more internally to share good ideas and good practice, and to ensure that all of our people, no matter where they work or at what level, feel connected to the programme for government and the business of the Executive. This is a positive programme of change, which I intend to be far-reaching in terms of scope and long-term impact, and which reflects the needs and concerns of the people we all serve. I am pleased that the First Minister and Deputy First Minister are supportive of the goals I have identified, although they also fully recognise the challenges and difficulties inherent of a programme of work of this scale and ambition, and the need to ensure that the right resources are in place to deliver it. However, our plans must amount to more than a set of abstract, long-term ambitions which are never realised. A critical element to delivering this programme will be agility, a focus in delivery both in the short term and in the medium term, building momentum and laying the foundations for the realisation of our long-term ambitions. With the next board, I will oversee this programme, ensuring it has been driven forward at the highest levels in our system. I will also continue to engage and build partnerships to strengthen our plans and deliver inclusive solutions. No matter how hard we work, our office will only really deliver when we deliver outcomes in partnership with people across societies. People and committees know what are required, and that is one of the reasons that the role of this committee is so important. I therefore look forward to working with you and your colleagues as we drive this programme forward, particularly where we need to build and enhance our civil service. This is new territory for me and for many. We will face major societal, economic and environmental challenges ahead, But if we work together, we have a chance to make the coming decade about delivering better. We all know how difficult this will be, but I am optimistic and ambitious about what we can achieve when I look back at what we've already accomplished. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Jayne, and thank you very much indeed for your evidence and sort of coming to talk to the committee. Coming from an outside sort of business environment, when you were first away, Dave, did you do a SWOT analysis with your team, and what were the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats you identified in the NICS?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I'm a systems, I'm an engineer, electrical engineer, and
I've heard you do the SWOT analysis before the City Council, so I wanted to hear what you said about this place.
Yeah, so the first piece is the data gathering. So I didn't sit down with the permanent secs actually at that stage to do the SWOT analysis initially, but we are going through that process at the moment. What I did was I looked at all the reports, and actually there are any number of reports about the civil service and recommendations and strategies. And I guess part of my inference from that is we need to move from strategies and action plans to delivery as part of that. So I gathered the data. A critical part was actually engagement. So every Friday afternoon, I spend time going out meeting with stakeholders. So my third day, I went to visit Magabry. I've been out with all our civil service departments across the place. I'll be out with some schools this Friday. So listening, I tried to listen more than I spoke during those initial engagements. I'm in week 11 at this stage. So I performed that whole data gathering piece, and I guess where I am synthesising in those 4 key themes that's come out of those discussions, and also engagement with the permanent secs around the table. So I think what the RHI and the Audit Office report has given us, it has given us a clear definition of where the areas are that we need to make change. And we are at a moment of inflection. COVID has brought us to a moment of inflection. So we have clear identification of issues, and we have a clear mechanism to show that the civil service has been able to transform and move quickly in the last 20 months. And we also have big challenges ahead. If I look across the system at Northern Ireland, we have big systemic issues. Our productivity has not changed substantively over the last number of years. We have the lowest levels of productivity. We have the highest areas of economic inactivity. So I've spent time talking to the ESA colleagues to understand the breakup of that. 50% of those 27% come with mental health issues, and that has only been exacerbated by the pandemic. Indeed, our under 25s will be more adversely impacted. So how do we look towards those big skills pieces in terms of those long-term 10-year objectives? Climate change is bringing very significant challenges. The next 10 years, we need to reduce our emissions about 50%. But those things can't be solved in a single department. So how do we get towards those synthesis of bringing those aspects together to have a whole systems approach to it? And the third of those big challenges, but still opportunities ahead of us, is actually in dealing with our health inequalities. From where I was born in North Belfast to where I live now, in this year, you die 7 years younger if you're a man from those 2 areas. So those are our big things that we need to actually bridge in terms of changing in the next 10 years. And those are what I am working with the departments, and also, of course, with the executive to look to see how we can have longer term functions. So if those are the big things we need to achieve, actually, what interventions do we need to put in place to deliver on those? So for me, transformation is an end in itself. It's a necessary thing we need to do to deliver that step change for the next 10 years. So that has been the synthesis of coming up with those 4 areas. Big delivery, what are the cross-cutting functions we need to deliver in? But actually to do that, you need to transform the capability and capacity of the civil service. You need to build in that expertise. You need to build in that innovation, that outward-looking horizon scanning to be more engaged and connected towards those big opportunities. And then you need to ensure that you're communicating and co-designing with those areas. So I think in matching, the strengths and weaknesses we have now towards that future opportunities and threats, this is a moment where we need to match them. We need to be really clear in it, going behind our strengths, and our strengths is a highly engaged public sector, from my experience of working with them, but also the areas that we've identified in capability capacity. How do we embrace the changes required for that to address the opportunities that we have ahead.
Okay, thanks. Bill wrote a very good report. I think he wrote to the RHI inquiry back in 2018, and he laid out in the back of the sort of report when he wrote to it, and he also laid out in sort of the annexes what were the sort of the things that were actually being done for NICS reform, and everything from changes in the senior management to delivery outcomes and all the rest of it. But that was in 2018, and here we are about to go into 2022, and a lot of those things haven't actually occurred. So is there any, have you had a chance to identify what is the blockages in transformation that there's been so far? Because I think we know what the problems were, and so Bill wrote a very sort of quite, it's two sort of papers he sent. I think we've got the dates of them in April and sort of later on in September, October. He very clearly laid out what the problems were, and the annexes seem to be a very good sort of aide-memoire of what needs to happen. Yet here we are, sort of, and I know you've just arrived, but here you are, and we haven't actually actioned any of them. And indeed, it was stated at the time then that the Northern Ireland Civil Service Board or the senior management were enacting these changes, yet the changes haven't occurred. How can we make sure that the changes actually do occur? And, I really get your mission, and, I'll ask you what your mission statement is and all that kind of stuff later on, but I really get your sort of desire to make it happen. But how do we get from the fact that, we knew what we needed to do in 2018, here we are in about to go into 2022 and we haven't done it?
Thank you, Chair. So I maybe ask Bill to come in at the appropriate time, but just to give you a reflection, maybe on RHI, and up until the last 20 months, when I looked up to the hill as a citizen, thinking RHI, what's going on, it was never an organisation. I never aspired to be in this position, but actually over the last 20 months, when I was in the view of the public sector, I saw how quickly it moved and actually delivered. It turned and it was innovative. Through part of that. So I just want to be clear, the reason I think that I can bring some level of change is I've come from that background of delivering that transformation, but also this, I didn't come to dismantle the civil service. I came here because I saw good people working really hard, and I'm sure around your days you've met those brilliant people, and I saw the opportunity to deliver better outcomes for our people. So whilst I can't talk about what happened up until, I can explain and give you evidence about what happened up until my appointment. I can tell you about my experience coming in, previously at an arm's length working with departments, but in the last 11 weeks. And actually I have found the service up for change. So since I have come in the first 4 weeks, I agreed with the Civil Service Board terms of reference. They were signed off that identified those 4 key themes. The permanent secs, as part of those 4 themes, have stood up. I've identified 4 permanent secs who are leading a programme of work. They're presenting back to the next board this Friday on actually what the short-term, the medium-term and longer-term aspects are for those. Those involve recruitment of key skills, scientific people, data people looking towards our comms, so identifying not just a strategy to do this and that, but actually what do you need to do to create that change mechanism. I have signed off an MO.
Do you think you've got the, I know what it's like coming in as a chief executive, and a lot of times you come in and you think, I've been brought in to make change, and it's quite evident that, the institution doesn't want to make change. Are you confident that the Northern Ireland Civil Service is ready to embrace the change that it needs to make? Because some of it's going to have to be quite radical if we're actually going to have to deliver.
Yeah, and that's towards my point previously when I looked up on the hill 20 months ago and thought it was too hard and, what's happening up there and that I couldn't be a kind of a change catalyst for it. When I worked within the Innovation Commissioner role, I worked really closely with Department for Economy at that stage. I was Innovation Commissioner, how we put innovation, and they were absolutely up for that change. And I guess I brought in some level of expertise and difference, and that's why that gave me thinking, okay, if we bring in some of these skill sets, we can actually. This is an organisation which is up for change. And also it did change in the last 18 months. Since I've come in, and I came in, I'm not naive, I'm coming into a role, I am the first external appointment, I'm the first substantive woman, I'm the first under 50, I'm lots of firsts and things. So I came in with my eyes wide open, but honestly that has not been the experience I've had. And of course, in any organisation, and I've worked in many different organisations, there will always be some individuals who will be more supportive than others, but I have found it a very supportive and embracing organisation. You know, I asked for leadership, so I was very conscious I didn't come in and say if it all worked out. These are the 4 key themes, because it's really clear, and that's come out of the Audit Office report. Because actually, I'm one person in 23,000. This needs to move that organisation. So I need to get the hearts and minds. And we talk about RHI and Audit Office, and there are very significant things, and it was, a defining moment for the civil service, but I don't think it should define us. But those will produce actual policies and implementation. But unless you get the culture change and you get that move and change, it has much more limited impact. So I see my role as providing that leadership and defining that culture change, and of course bringing in new people around different tables as well, and the permanent sec recruitment is part of that. The looking towards bringing in undergraduates and graduates as part of that. And I will have challenges ahead. I'm not naive in thinking of that, but actually it's been a very positive rationale from that as well. And I guess what we need to do is not to say, I can't say I'm going to change everything in the service in the first 3 months. You know, where do I choose to prioritise my time in the midst of it? What will make the big differences? SIB, I'm going to be involved in the appointment in terms of the chair of that board, because that is a big strategic play for us, and it's important for me to be involved. Permanent sec pieces are also really critically important. Relationship with DOF, critically important. My role in the executive as well. But I really need to be really clear where the bits are I can make the difference. You know, performance development for the permanent sec is a really important area for me as well, because that needs to trickle down. And I guess you know the organisation structure of the executive and the ministerial control. A lot of this is soft power and influence. So I need to be quite nuanced about how that can deliver.
Jayne, just on that point, because obviously one of the things when you look outside is that it's great they've brought somebody in to take over the head of the civil service from outside. And that's something that many of us were quite pleased to see and advocate for. But we also have another senior civil servant as appointed as the senior civil servant in the executive office. So from externally, it looks as if the civil services have appointed a minder for you, pardon to use the language, but it does look externally like that when you look at the structure. You know, you're either the head of the civil service, which you're head of the machine, and it's only in Northern Ireland where we tend to end up getting 2 heads of the civil service for some strange reason. Could you just outline what that interrelationship is? Because I think that comes crucial to our understanding of, do you have the support to make the changes? And again, you know, and I notice you say, like, you're not going to make lots of changes within 3 months, but you know well as I do, if you're the chief executive and you come in, you've got a relatively short time to sort of stamp your shift on it before the institution comes up and grabs it, or they try to do whatever they happen to do. So could you just sort of outline what that interrelationship piece is, please?
Yes, of course, Chair. And I guess firstly, it's a very positive relationship for me as well, and has been great as part of that. But there's a really clear distinction between the permanent sec role and my role. And what had been the practice over the last 10 years actually was that the accounting officer within the department was actually a grade 3 level. So that the head of the civil service didn't hold an accounting officer role. So this has been replaced to that the permanent sec, Dennis McMahon, is the accounting officer for that overall, the operational delivery. And as you'll be aware, within the executive office, there are substantive operational projects like the TBOC, the urban villages, those programmes, historical institutional programmes as well that are running, which actually require very significant operational oversight. The differential of the role allows me to actually act more strategically and more across the service. It allows me more time to spend and to be focused on those big Northern Ireland Civil Service Board areas, enhancement, delivery, indeed, of the RHI and the Audit Office recommendations and plan, and to spend more time in looking towards those future level programmes. So actually there's a very clear delineation between the actual roles that are defined, although there is a very close cooperation that I have with Dennis McMahon through that. And I would say that it's been optimum for me in terms of doing doing those areas, because I would
So
be...
the Henry Kissinger question is, who do I go to see? The head of the civil service? It's very definitely you.
It is very definitely me, yes, absolutely.
And to use another American tautology, using the Truman thing, the buck stops with you.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm very clear about that.
Okay, thanks. Just one final, and it's probably a slightly more sort of techie question. The Group Internal Audit and Fraud Investigation Service review found that not all the departments were compliant with the whistleblowing legislation. Are you going to make sure that they are all compliant with the whistleblowing legislation?
I guess, of course, we're aware of the whistleblowing legislation, and we were discussing with our colleagues prior to this. Obviously, there was some media attention, so I'll perhaps pass over to my colleague, Colin, to respond to that.
Simple answer to that is yes. So if there are any set of audit recommendations that come back or identifying any issue like that, where we're not in line with good practice, we'd certainly pick it up and deal with it and respond to it positively. So that's the intention.
Do we know which departments weren't?
I don't have the detail on that.
Couldn't let us know that, could you? That would be quite useful for us to be aware of that. Okay, thanks. Matthew, you're up.
Thank you, Chair. Who is the senior responsible owner for the Civil Service Reform Programme?
We have, I think, thank you.
Thank you for your evidence, by the way.
Thank you, Mr. Toole. I think we've shared the MOU in terms of the agreement that we have with Department of Finance. So in terms of the policy provision, that is also a policy intervention with Department of Finance. I own leadership of the Northern Ireland Civil Service, most significantly through leadership of the Northern Ireland Civil Service and leadership of the Permanent Secretary roles. So whilst I don't own policy responsibility, it is my responsibility to look towards how that leadership is provided within the Permanent Sec roles and the cultural piece that needs to be delivered in order to fulfil the policy piece. I don't know whether, Colin, you want to come in?
Just to take that through then in terms of the SRO question, it's one thing developing the policy and setting how you think that's going to be brought forward. The implementation will sit in terms of NICS reform will sit with the head of the service. Make sure that that's driven down through Perm Secs, Grade 3s, right down through the organisation, across all the different departments. So that sits in that space. So there is a collaborative relationship there, but in terms of the implementation, that's very, very clear as an SRO role where that would actually sit at an operational level.
It's definitely you. And you are the SRO for Civil Service Reform, and you're responsible for delivering it. Just to be, because you can understand, we got a briefing from the department beforehand, and it said, I'll sort of read it briefly, in order to deliver this Civil Service Reform, the Finance Minister, as Minister, is responsible for the general management and control of the Civil Service. We've covered that. We'll work with First Minister, Deputy First Minister, thereby enabling HoCS to work collectively with the next board and Permanent Secretaries to plan and deliver reform and modernisation of the service. There is a bit of, I'm not going to say it's confused, it can slightly confusing in first reading. So it's reassuring to hear you say that you are the SRO for Civil Service Reform.
Could I just add something to that as well? It's a very broad church. Civil Service Reform is absolutely huge. So, for example, within Civil Service Reform, one of the Grade 3s who works for me is the SRO for the Central Government Transformation Programme, which is a £35 million investment over the next 7 years, looking at replacing a couple of very significant systems. So Civil Service Reform will get built up by different people looking after different pieces. So there would be SROs across the piece. In terms of where all that culminates inside the civil service, it culminates around the NICS board. But the NICS board, headed by Jayne, links in very, very closely through the MOU with the Minister for Finance, who sets where the policy sits around all of that. So it's very much a partnership piece in there.
And just to say, obviously in the PAC reports, there's clear identification of the role that I have as part of implementation of those, and the role the next board has at a PAC. That was in our MOR response at a more granular level of how we will deliver those collectively.
Do you think that...
Sorry, just a second. Jayne, do you report to the Finance Minister then for this delivery?
No, I report to FM and DFM, and our joint MOU is between FM and DFM and the Finance Minister in terms of our engagement.
This is, Steve, just to answer, Chair, this is a matrix arrangement, which is the modern way of doing things. So it works very seamlessly. and the relationship's a very positive one. So that's the MOU embodies that. That's the way it was decided to take it forward.
Thanks, sorry, Matthew.
Appreciating that in management terms, there is a perception and a kind of public communication rule in terms of, but it's helpful to understand, Jayne, that you're responsible for the delivery, even if the engine is more complicated than MLAs are qualified to understand. But and I hope that you working with the finance minister and the first ministers can remain publicly accountable for that. On the some of the things that were in the NIAO report, is there a target date for lowering the age profile of the civil service as a whole, but particularly the senior civil service? Obviously, one of the most pressing things in there was the very high proportion of over 50s. No offence to over 50s, but obviously that creates a very sharp workforce planning issue. If I think 85 or 80% of your senior management are over 50. So what's the specific target and plan for addressing that?
Okay, so maybe I'll mention just a few reflections on that, Mr. O'Toole. Firstly, I am under 50, but for a few months only. So I've brought down that average significantly. But actually, you're right. It isn't.
Nothing wrong in being over 50.
Next April, I will.
Through the chair, Mr. Wells. Through the chair, Mr. Wells. And no, there isn't anything wrong. Right.
But you're right. We haven't done good enough in terms of our age profile. If I look, I think 0.4%. We're under 25. We're up to 1.1% now. Currently, as of October, who are under 25, and that's around 253 people. That's not good enough. So we need to do that at all levels, and that's a really clear theme. What we're looking at in terms of our undergraduate and our graduate and learning. Department for Economy developed assured skills programs externally, really successful programs that gave opportunities and expertise into those services. So we're looking at trialling those in pilot programs within 2 departments to bring in those youth and scale programs. Obviously, part of and I'm just running the permanent sec recruitment process, and we cannot, we're open to different age groups, and we cannot specifically, employ as part of a criteria. But what I have been heartened by is actually the diversity of applications that have come in across the sector, and it was a clear theme for me coming in to be engaged as part of that. And whilst we can talk about targets, etc., I think my appointment signals externally that the civil service is up for looking towards more diversity in terms of different backgrounds and also from age profiles. So I'll maybe hand to Colin if we have any specific targets in place.
Well, just I'm always humoured when I hear the reality of 1% of our staff under the age of 25. In that category, I think it's a really big challenge in itself. Setting aside the SCS for a minute, the fact that we had the voluntary exit scheme, the fact that voluntary exit scheme then was compounded by a moratorium in recruitment in terms of all of the cost-saving measures, those factors are now felt very, very strongly. Our recruitment process was also slowed during the time of the worst of the pandemic. So the natural process of refreshing and growing and bringing new people in at a much younger age has been significantly slowed. The good news on that front is that we have some significant open programs that are now well advanced, and we'll be bringing people in November, December, January, which we hopefully will see a change. But the big challenge in all of this is understanding what our workforce model is. And one of the key pieces out of the capacity and capability report, which NIO did, was about saying we need to get a really good handle on our workforce model. We're not alone in that. Westminster struggled with that. We know the Cabinet Office is struggling with that. Scotland and Wales have also struggled with that challenge. So getting the right workforce model so you can anticipate when people will leave and when new people will come in ordinary circumstances, and try to really build up that profile is a significant challenge. Now, Jill's been very active as well in this, and as the head of HR, in terms of some of the specific mechanisms that we're pulling on to try and engage more young people. I'll maybe let her just come in at this stage, because I think there'll be a couple of extra points she'd want to maybe to add to that.
Yeah, if that's okay, Chair. Yeah, I mean, one of the issues actually has been that, as Colm said, there are numbers of factors that have contributed to this. One is we actually have a very low turnover rate. We also, as Colm said, had that embargo on recruitment, and we had the VAs. But also we have a default recruitment position of internal promotion boards, and that policy. So if we're not recruiting externally, you can't expect the age profile to change. There has been a fundamental review of that policy, and that has been agreed in the first instance as a policy direction by the Finance Minister, and that is very much looking at, in line with the PAC recommendation and the Northern Ireland Audit Office recommendation, of effectively opening up recruitment. So, I mean,
just for clarity, we're going to open up all grades for external recruitment?
That's basically what we're looking at, except in, you know, particular circumstances. So, for example, if we were in a situation where we might actually have surplus, or there was an affordability issue, but the policy direction is very much that we would look to be opening that up. Mm-hmm. Now, formal consultation has to take place with the trade unions, but effectively that don't like using the term game changer, but that is something that, if you change that policy of moving away from internal promotion boards, which basically meant that you were recruiting from the just the grade below, to allowing anybody to apply through an open competition. We have 5 large-scale open external recruitment competitions ongoing at the minute, and those will bring in significant numbers. Then, in addition to that, we are recruiting the specialist, technical and professional posts externally, and that goes to the heart of making sure that we get the right people with the right skills. But as Jayne and Colin have mentioned, we are replacing, when the GB Civil Service changed its fast stream, we now have designed our own, so we're going to have a management trainee scheme that's going to launch in spring. We have, as you know, expanded our apprenticeships. We have 2 new apprenticeship schemes. So we have operational delivery apprenticeship scheme, and we have procurement, and that's in addition to the ones we already have. But then, aligned to that, we need a big programme of work around, and Jayne talked about strategic communications, but there's almost a marketing piece and a comms piece around selling the Northern Ireland Civil Service as an employer of choice. And we've already started on that, in that when we're doing our large-scale recruitments and our external recruitments, our apprenticeships, our student placements, we're working with DFC around the job start. So when we're doing all of these things now, you know, we're not just advertising in the newspapers, we are, you know, using social media and using media platforms that will particularly attract the young people. And we are also engaging with our colleges and our local universities. And if it wasn't for COVID, we'd be right back out there in all the big careers fairs that we used to be able to go to. So look, it's a big programme of work, and I know it may well be that, you know, so you're asking about a specific target by which point you would want to reduce the age, but there are so many aspects of the work. So there are targets for those interventions and policy pieces, and they'll all contribute to that, and it will make a big difference to opening it up, not just around age, other aspects of diversity as well, and sort of that diversity of thought, people coming in from other sectors as well. So big programme of work.
I'll hand over to the second chair. I want let us just a couple of brief ones. Welcome, obviously, having written to both of you about this, and with some of my own ideas, my party's ideas on recruitment. I'm pleased to see a lot of this is happening. But can I ask a slightly separate question about something that is important? I think it does link to some of these issues of public confidence. Why wasn't your immediate predecessor, Jayne, a civil servant? Why wasn't the previous head of the civil service a civil servant?
Thank you, Mr. Toole. But my predecessor, Jenny Piper, she, as you reflect, she wasn't a civil service employee, and she was employed under the terms of the Strategic Investment Board under an operational partnership agreement for the duration of the appointment, of course, which was bound during that process by the staff handbook. And it was unprecedented conditions following David Sterling's retirement at the end of August 2020, and the previous process, which was to appoint the incoming HoCS, did not satisfactorily come to a conclusion and preference. So at that stage, FM and DFM, in the light of obviously the pandemic and the implications of not having a head of the civil service, undertook a process to identify an interim role. And it was on that basis, through work with NICS HR and through the Civil Service Commissioners, that they identified a need for an interim HoCS, whilst also identifying the need to run a further process, of which I was a recipient, and resulting appointee as a permanent head of the civil service. So that was the context and the background to that. Jenny Piper was employed under a fixed term contract for the duration of that piece. It was 8 months, and I think that went to 9 months, just due to the time that it took for me to fulfil my obligations in terms of taking up the role. So that was the rationale in terms of that appointment process, Mr. Toole.
Would you accept that, given some of the, I suppose to put it mildly, public concern and interest around civil service reform and leadership over the past half dozen years, it would have been better to make clear that this head of the civil service, albeit on an interim basis, was not a civil servant, and that it will strike lots of people as somewhat bizarre that the head of the civil service was not subject to the Civil Service Code?
Thank you, Mr. Toole. I guess I'm not here to kind of qualify about kind of the perspective. I guess what happened during that process, a number of options were evaluated in terms of putting that interim role in place, and the decision was made and evaluated that using SIB as a vehicle was the most appropriate. Under that vehicle, I understand the individual was also bound, obviously, by the SIB handbook in terms of reference about the confidentiality agreements required as part of that, and that was the process that was undertaken at that time.
Mindy, but just in your role now, in terms of perception, and you referred to perception of the civil service now as something you care about, what people, the average Joe or Jane blogs in Northern Ireland thinks about, that it's a slightly bizarre situation that when the Civil Service Code and the quality and applicability of the Civil Service Code was a subject of extreme public interest, that the Civil Service head, even if they were on an interim basis, was not subject to it, is a strange and anomalous, at the very least, situation to be in.
I think at the time the decision was made, it was a strange and anomalous time. That we had a position where there was no head of the civil service because Sir David Sterling had retired from that position. We're in the middle of a pandemic, so I understand that FM and DFM undertook an evaluation of a number of different options, and it was identified that this was the optimum option to utilise in terms of fulfilling that. There were obviously obligations as part of that which were passed through, and it was through a secondment contract. But we also do identify in the Audit Office reports that the use of secondments, and it was under that framework. It was also under the guidance of the Civil Service Commissioners, who also reviewed that process, and there was a process that was adhered to as part of that.
Well, I think I could speak on behalf of my committee colleagues. There's lots of things we don't agree on, but I think from our perspective we would have liked to have known that this anomalous position was happening. And just a final question.
Matthew, just to come in for one thing. Jayne, obviously because of the interest there's been on the fact that we managed to have a head of the civil service who wasn't a civil servant, and we're in a recruitment process now for permanent secretary positions. And I think it would be quite useful if you could state now that anybody who's going to be in a senior accounting position or responsible position within the civil service will in fact be a civil servant, because that does bring into some real questions about going ahead in the future. Because having somebody who comes under the SIB or something, the rest of it, and seems to be, I'm not saying anything about your predecessor, But the reality is we need to have accountability and responsibility. And you very clearly said the buck stops with you. But if you're not somebody who is the head of the is a senior civil servant and is part of the Northern Ireland Civil Service, can you make that commitment that the senior post will in fact be filled by civil servants?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I can make that commitment. I will be open and transparent as part of that process, but also as part of the provisions of the Audit Office recommendations, it also looks towards secondments as part of that, which may come under a different mechanism. Obviously, we will work with the Civil Service Commissioners. Clearly, as part of that, maybe bring in Jill just in terms of the recommendations that came through. From our committee's perspective, and just some of the issues we've been seeing about, and we went through a private members bill. It's all about sort of making sure that we have proper accountability, to make sure that sort of ministerial codes and other codes were being followed and the rest of it. I mean, for us, I think it is absolutely essential. One of the lessons from RHI is that we have somebody who's fully accountable to the codes and the systems that are laid down in. And if somebody's not accountable to the NICS code, they shouldn't be in the position, as sort of my perspective on it. Yeah, so I can maybe bring Jill in terms of the clarification for the permanent sec recruitment, but I can give you my commitment that I will be open and transparent in terms of that process. There is also a number of other areas that's probably pertinent to identify, that we are looking at the secondment process as part of a broader review, and actually what the terms that should be passed on as part of those any secondment contracts, which would include conflicts of interest. And I'm also undertaking a review with SIB in terms of the nature of our engagement as well, and how we engage them most effectively, both of those which will tie into the terms and conditions which they're undertaking. I don't know whether, Jill, you want to come in terms of secondment? That's completely right, Jane, in terms of, so I mean, just to clarify in terms of the interim HoCS appointment, as Jane said, that there were a number of options that were put and were considered. It was an unprecedented situation in an unprecedented time, but actually, there is provision for secondment of people for an interim role. There are strict rules around that in terms of the civil service policy, and there are strict rules around that in terms of the commissioners, and both of those policies were completely complied with in terms of that. In terms of the actual arrangement with SIB, there were many things that the person who filled the role did have to comply with. So that was the highest level of security clearance, the Official Secrets Act. There were also requirements in terms contractually to work in the best interests of the Northern Ireland Civil Service at all time. It set out the main role of the job. It also required the post holder to get agreement from FN and DFM if there was any potential conflict of interest activity. They had to behave in line with the Northern Ireland Civil Service Code of Ethics, and there was provision for the termination of the contract if there was any act of misconduct. But as Jane said, so those policies and all of those things were complied with. It's the OPA agreement with SIB is a long-standing one, but I know whether SIB is looking at that. Nevertheless, the Civil Service is looking at its secondment policy as a key element of its recruitment policy. So that piece of work that we're doing around recruitment, we are prioritising the secondment, because actually we do want to second people in and out of the civil service. We do want that, as the Cabinet Office is calling it, porosity. We do want the ability for people to come in and out and bring those skills with them. But we want to make very sure that actually they are completely governed by the relevant bits of the civil service terms that we would want them to. So that's the piece of work that's undergoing at the minute, and that should be completed by the end of the month.
But my final point and final question.
No, just one piece of clarity. So, Jane, you were very clear about the open and transparent bit, but you weren't particularly clear about that it was fully subject to the sort of the Northern Ireland Civil Service not only terms and conditions, but also the Code of Conduct. And that was reflecting the piece that the
roles that are advertised are also open to secondment opportunities.
Yeah, I'm
as
sorry, we'll
part
get the
of
secondment
that
bit,
piece.
but our concern is that if a secondee, you must be subject to the same rules of discipline.
And also identified
accountability.
that Nick's HR are undergoing a review of those.
So it's not in place yet, but it will be.
It will be within the next number of weeks. It will be before any appointment is made in terms of that. So we are reflecting on the need to make sure that secondments are leveraged to the best advantage. Obviously, it's an opportunity to bring in new and diverse.
I think we agree with that, but we just want to make sure that
Yes.
we have the control.
And I think we would be happy to come back with the reflections in terms of what that secondment and revision and
You
policies
beat me
would
just
be.
to it. Well done, thanks.
No, I
Thank you very much
I don't want to let other people say
Sorry, Matthew,
but would you agree that the thing that the interim HoCS was not subject to was a cooling off? One thing was a cooling off period. Having been, and this is no aspersion on her intentions, but having been, I presume, not copied out of, for example, the draft energy strategy, she has gone straight from, I presume, being on a copy list or a potential copy list for the draft energy strategy to being on the board of a major energy company. That's no aspersion; it's just an observable fact. Do you need to look at, as part of the what sounds like quite a big and at times incoherent programme of civil service reform? Do we need to look at cooling rules around business appointments? For example, obviously in Whitehall they have HoCOBA, which is toothless, but at least there's a consistency around the publication of guidelines to civil servants. I'm not aware that, Nick, there is any consistent approach to publishing business appointment rulings.
We do.
Thank you.
We do?
We do.
Is it published consistently?
Yeah, it is. It is published. There are conditions around where conditions are applied. There is that we actually do publish as well. We are in line with the Cabinet Office on that, and we actually have undertaken an initial review of the business as well as the secondments piece. We are looking at the business appointments piece. We've done benchmarking with the other jurisdictions and to see, and we are largely in line and practically the same as the Cabinet Office. Just some small changes that. Column is considering at the minute, and then that will go to the Minister for full consideration.
Thank you. Alicia.
Agus Chair, agus Factor Overlig. You're all very welcome here today too. Agus congratulations Linda Postnew mar Conras Service Civil. Congratulations as well on your new post as head of the Civil Service. A job I'm sure that maybe I should be offering commiserations, possibly.
Best job in the world, tell my children.
Well, that's excellent that you feel that way. So, just homing in on issues that have arisen as a result of many of the reports that we've had on the civil service, and in particular about the healthy work-life balance, and in relation then to hubs and the development of the hubs, and people being able to work from home. What do you think the civil service hubs will have on ensuring a regionally balanced service? And as a rural dweller myself, I'm very, very interested in this because many of the people that I know who are in the civil service that will benefit greatly from it, and from an approach that would take on board not only just to say the issues in relation to COVID, and that's which seems to highlight in many respects, but also the many other issues that are prevalent in relation to hubs and where it is that they're located.
Thank you, Mr McHugh, and thank you for your congratulations. Looking forward to working with you. I think one of the opportunities that has come out of the pandemic is in terms of the new ways of working, and not just within the civil service, but actually for Northern Ireland. If you look towards actually how our businesses have operated, we are short of skills within the big urban areas, and actually if we look towards more regionally, we can actually have a much bigger scale and product offer to some of our international companies and our local Indigenous companies when we look towards those new and different ways of working. So that, and I think what the civil service has to do is to lead from the front in terms of developing new ways of working, which has been led by DOF in terms of those hub-in centres as well. I think a further benefit that gives in terms of the regional development piece is actually those aren't identified per department, and to tackle our big systemic issues we actually need joined up working. So I think the ability even within multi-departments to work in those regional areas will actually encourage those different breaking down of silos, because much of that is about the culture and engagement part of that as well. So I think it's a real area that we can escalate and move more broadly in terms of delivering those other aspects. So I know Colin has obviously, we have the programme in terms of the hub, and we've got the number of ones that are open as well. So maybe you want to reflect on.
Just to add to what Jayne has said, excuse me, we have 2 open already, one in Ballykelly and one in Downpatrick. By the end of this calendar year, we'll also have 2 more, one in Ballymena and one in Craigavon. And our plans are to have 2 more open by the end of the financial year, one open in Omagh and one in Bangor in Rothgill House. So there's been good investment in those. We see the value in those. I think one of the big silver linings in terms of the pandemic as well, even though the first one of those in Ballykelly would have been, in Downpatrick would have been mooted very early on as a pilot, we see the value in terms of people working in different work styles, and we've done a really strong analysis of what that actually means. And about 70% of our workforce can work on a hybrid basis, either home and an office, or in a hub and an office and a home. So there's a mixture of ways that they can work. Also, 14% of our workforce are doing jobs which are classified as mobile jobs through this process, and another 16% are workplace based, just in terms of the jobs that they do. So given a very significant number of people working on a hybrid basis, it augurs very, very well in terms of the potential offered by the hubs, but also the potential that's offered because of digital capability that staff have and the equipment that they have work from home as well on an ongoing basis. And obviously we've seen the changes yesterday in terms of where that's going to go. We're very well equipped to deal with that. But the future here is very exciting for us, because it does allow us to have a workforce which is very much dispersed across the north, and it allows people to work wherever they need to work, whenever they need to work. So there's a lot of really good flexibility there. And it does also give us opportunities to reflect and extract value from the estate that we have in the longer term as well.
Well, would it also cause you concern if you heard that for some personnel within the civil service that when they have maybe opted to work from home, that they haven't been given that permission?
Sometimes, well, as I said, some of the 16% of the roles, the job roles, would be workforce based or workplace based. So I know in my previous department, when I was in the Department for Communities, I had responsibility for jobs and benefits offices, and people need to be in the offices to perform functions in the offices. You can't perform them anywhere else. So there is a challenge for us there, where people in certain roles might like a change to be in a different role. And that can be challenging. It's not just challenging for us, it's challenging for other jurisdictions as well. So we do know that that's happening already. People are saying, actually, I love doing what I'm doing, but I'd love to be able to work from home. But if your job doesn't allow you to work from home because of the nature of it. So, for example, if you're doing a job across a public desk in a registration office, for example, or a jobs and benefits office where the public come in, then clearly that doesn't really allow you to work from home as much as maybe you would like to be able to do.
Well, just that I know that has been an issue for some people, and they have brought it to my attention as well too as an elected rep, just that in some cases that were quite clearly it was they were able to work from home for a certain period of time, but then later on there was an expectation that they'd be in the office all the time while still doing the same job. But we'll just park that one.
Yeah, I guess that's obviously a reflection, a part of that. I guess a key theme of the new ways of working is that the services we deliver to citizens is the first thing that needs to be ensured. That is our duty. We are public servants. So, and that is a different approach within each department, as Colin has said. But I think that's we need to have the citizen at the heart of this, and then form the structures. Notwithstanding, there will be anomalies and issues within that, Mr. McHugh, as well.
Thank you. And one other issue just that has been raised in the various reports that we would have had is that there's a general feeling that within the civil service that they haven't recruited, we'll say, the real expertise in certain areas to fill particular roles. And in fact, when we hear about contracts not being negotiated and the lack of expertise there, and I'm sure that you and your new appointment have been made aware of that as well too. And I asked just what strategies are being adopted now at the present time in order to deal with that particular problem.
Yeah, well, no, thank you, Mr. McHugh. That's a clear priority for me, and I come from a kind of technical expert background as well. So I talked about some of those 4 key priorities. One of those is in innovation. And actually, what are those core skills and capabilities that we need to build in-house? And I would think we need to have them as Northern Ireland Civil Service. Core capabilities. You know, we use a lot of consultants which are there for a time and place, but for me they should only be used as dealing with overflows or specific project pieces. We shouldn't outsource our core strategic thinking. We need to build a core strategic thinking core. So some of those roles identified through that analysis we have done is that chief scientific advisors at the core that can provide broader input into cross-departmentals, but also can be outward looking, you know, and can do that initial assessment. And I saw, you know, in the RHI recommendations of who does that initial triage and really checking hard if these are the facts and figures before you go near a consultant. We absolutely need to build those core skills internally, because to be strategic, we need to have those in terms of forward-looking horizon scanning. So I'm deeply committed to developing that. That's one of our core themes as well in terms of delivering those aspects.
It's very encouraging to hear that. And I know I have other questions there, but I'm sure that the other
Militia, maybe we can have one more.
No, sorry, I'm sure the other representatives will be able to ask the same questions. I'm dead conscious just of time in that respect, but thank you for your answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay, thanks very much, Dave. Pat?
Thank you, Chair. I'll not be too long, and thanks very much. Jayne, Colin, Jill and Bill. I come from a small pub background before I was elected quite later. In fact, this is my first mandate. And as we come to the end of this mandate, and you've said about that 10-year plan of where you want to be, and I wish to wish you all every success in that journey. You opened up with productivity, where we are with productivity, and coming from that business background, how do we change the productivity, for the want of a better word, of the Northern Ireland Civil Service? Can it change within? Is it changeable? And naturally, you've taken on the job and you believe that that can change. When I look at other jurisdictions and I see the amount and the numbers of civil servants compared to population, I believe that, am I correct in saying that Northern Ireland is quite heavy in that? So how do you go about making those savings, where we can make those savings in order to feed into our public services much better, and by taking them away from the costs? Instead of having 3 or 4 barmen, if you could get that same job done with 2. It's not a case, it has to be better. And are you up for that challenge? Because that's going to be quite ruthless within the civil service as we have it at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Catney, and appreciate your long-standing tenure and your background. The first priority for me, obviously on the direction of ministers, is to deliver better value and services for the people of Northern Ireland. And I guess that's where I start. So in that productivity element, you need to focus. You talked about SWOT, the areas where we're actually really good at, you know, and we have got brilliant sectors, and tourism and kind of the hospitality is a really strong sector, but those areas like fintech, where we're growing, you know, we're the #1 destination for US FDI investment, and those skills and those jobs and those opportunities for our young people who are going to be very, significantly impacted with the result of the pandemic. How do we provide those pathways? You don't need to go to university for 4 years to take up many of those jobs. So those pathways to invest in the sectors which will give you higher productivity. The second part of that is we can't have 27% economic inactivity actually as part of that. So we need to systemically go after how do we get that down at a level, drill in, and I know Colin was in charge of the department, but drill into actually where are, and those are long-term, systemic, really difficult issues. I went to Maghabri on my first week, and 71% of the people in Maghabri left school are between 14 and 16. So that's where the system fails. And actually, and if you come from a lower economic background, you die younger. And 91% of the ones in Maghabri had alcohol and drugs addiction. So that's where the whole thing gets you to. So we need to solve the problems of those economically inactive and bring them into the labour market, because we'll never reach into a high productivity sector in Northern Ireland unless we bridge. You can't have 27% not participating, notwithstanding the long-term impact it has on those and the social injustice. So that is, I guess, looking at what do we need to be in 10 years, not to be here, but to give that hope and ambition. And I guess why I'm minded to do that is because Northern Ireland people are brilliant. We are so ambitious and we are so entrepreneurial, and you're in the entrepreneurial trade, and we deserve to have those, perspectives. If you look at Thompson's Dock, it was built for a ship that was never imagined to be that big. That was what we did 100 years ago, because we were so ambitious for that. And the reason I came into the service was actually I saw that ambition between public sector servants who I worked with, and I thought, well, I have ideas and views that can actually bring in to actually make that change. Very ambitious programmes, decade of innovation in the economy, but you can't solve the economy in the economy. You need to go to schools, and you need to go to communities, and you need to have the right labour workforce in our health services, and that feeds into those other aspects. So it needs a whole system view. And then in doing that, back to your original question, you need then to define actually, and I didn't come in to dismantle the civil service or to do a hatchet job, because there's people there I respect and they're all around me today, and life is hard enough rather than going in for those things, and it is a hard job. I came in to build it for what it needs to be to deliver those outcomes for the next 10 years for our under 25s and for those people who are third generation unemployed, and how we get those pathways, and that will deliver for our economy. That will deliver us something, a big step change. So I know it is going to be really challenging and difficult, but actually that's the prize if we can go after that. And that will drive productivity at all levels. And it will be a different organisation in 10 years. As any organisation that looks towards a 10-year time frame is, there'll be a right size. We're going through a big transformation here in terms of how we work. We will need new capabilities and skills. You talked about the UK Gov. They have a transformation and reform programme ongoing as well as all other devolved areas. So form follows function. So the function is we need to deliver better service to people of Northern Ireland under the direction of ministers, and then what is the structure of an organisation that we need to do that, and then address the hard issues. RHI shone a light on those things, but actually it would be much more challenging for me coming into this role if we didn't. Not that you would ever wish for it, but if you hadn't got those clear definition of where the kind of the fault lines are within the organisation, because it's really clear what needs to be done. We just now need to get on and get it done.
And hopefully that's in partnership, as you say, with all of us, with ourselves who are elected. I want to go back and just to let, I'm an MLA for Macabry and the good constituents of Macabry. You weren't speaking about them, we were talking about Her Majesty's President, just to make that clear, Chair, are you with me? Because it could have cost me a few votes. But look, I suppose you've answered the question I want to ask, but I mean, is the Northern Ireland Civil Service, in your opinion, culturally, and is it opposed to any change, particularly opposed to any change? Any changes, are you able to, there is the thought out there that the culture is very difficult. It's going to be hard to turn this huge big ship around, but you're up for it, and it is up for change, and that's something that we must take out positive, and we must demand delivery on it.
Absolutely. So I would have said 24 months ago, before I came anywhere near the public sector, when I was in venture capital, it's too hard. They're up here in the hill. I don't understand. It's too hard. And then I worked with them, and I saw they were up for change. Yeah. And actually, COVID there will be, and we're going through lots of issues at the moment. But everyone actually has been touched by what the civil service has done over the last 18 months. My children got their booster vaccinations. They're across the road in school. The teachers made it all work, complicated and difficult as it was. Department of Finance turned itself into a grant-giving facility from being a different organisation. Department for Economy went and delivered many. And there'll be issues as you move quickly. There'll be risks, and there'll be an inquiry, and we'll find out, and we'll be around this table again, and we'll do lessons learned, because that's the right thing to do. But actually, it did fundamentally shift, and actually that shows it is up for change. And you talk about as a big mass or a big blob of the civil service. I go out every Friday and I meet people outside of my turret in the castle, and I meet people on the, who are lower levels in civil service working really hard, and I have been struck by the commitment in public service. There's a story, there's lots of places to meet, but I went down to Department for Communities, and there's a Lag and Weir lookout. You will have seen it there, and I was there visiting. And because I'm an engineering, thinks I'm an engineer, it was great. It was all the Lag and Weir and how they open that up. and that's part of a regeneration programme. And I met the Laggan master, and they had a boat. They were taking me up from one of the weirs to the one in Stramillis, and it was, looking forward to that. And we went in the boat, and actually, as it happened, very sadly, a young individual entered the water, and the first responders phoned. But they didn't phone anyone else. They phoned actually the Laggan master and us in the boat to be there with them as they tried to marshal that out. And we were there for 2.5 hours. Now, these were people who were engineers in charge of constructing and opening and closing weirs. But that's what they do day and daily. And actually, they sent in other boats. So those are, that's part of communications. Who tells their story? Those really brilliant civil servants who are doing that. And that's public service. You'll see they have the banner for the Samaritans out there from the bridge, and they watch that 24 hours. Those are the people, the civil service needs better, and ultimately we need to live better for our service. So there are many brilliant people doing brilliant things. It's my job to lead that, to amplify what they're doing, to set the tone, but to specify clear direction of where we need to get to. And we need a step change. We need a step change of outcomes for our citizens. And of course, that's the ministerial dimension. But some of these things take longer than a government timeline. They take 10 years. So what is the underlying framework we need to put in place, working collectively together with my permanent secs around the table who have all stood up and taken those challenges and worked with me. So,
a couple more, just Chair. Well, you, excellent. Thanks very much. And for that, I did say there before, when the late 70s and early 80s, I was aware of the estate which Colin had mentioned of the civil service in behind, I'm not going to talk, within Belfast, and how those jobs, when they were placed there, kept the life of that city going, and those worst of times that we all survived. So where those jobs go and how this situate can play a part in all of us as we do move forward. Jayne, no doubt within your 3 months, you've looked at this change and priced some of this change into the strategy for the 10 years. Do you have the money to make this change, or is the money within as it is there, or is the money available for you, or is that an ask?
So obviously we have the budget process is ongoing, and there's some rules that we've talked about, and those are in the budgeting process. Also, part of this is looking at the outward trajectory. What are our big investment cases, and how do we leverage the funds that are available? So, you look, east-west, there's the levelling up proposition and funds there which are non-Barnetised. There is the shared island funds and those pieces that we have already committed to, and also our broader US international kind of relations as well. So the first piece is actually say, what are these core strategic areas? And some of it isn't about looking for new money, but there may be opportunities for new money. It's actually saying, how can we work together to make sure that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, and bringing those together. You look towards the green growth strategy led by DERA, but needed to be delivered by the whole system. So how do we make sure that the funding and interventions we are funding actually kind of deliver together? I think some of it also has to look to the data evidence. So how do we actually make sure that we're using evidence base for those decisions, and how we track and monitor and get hard KPIs into saying, are we getting better as we enhance that? So there's a piece of what are our investment cases, how can we get that funded, but also more joined up proposition as well.
Thanks very much. And I know as well just how hard I know the civil servants and the work, and how their doors always open for us, but I wish you every success and fly the flag high for the private sector.
Okay. Thanks very much indeed. Gemma?
Thank you, Chair, and I want to thank you all for coming in today. And Jayne, I want to say congratulations, and I look forward to seeing what changes you're going to bring, because I must say you're definitely saying all the right things anyway, so hopefully it comes to pass. I just want to bring you to the issue of agency workers, and this might be a question for Jill rather than yourself, but you can work it out. The Audit Office reports show just how reliant the civil service is on agency workers, and I'm just wondering, is there a plan going forward to decrease the reliance on agency workers?
Thanks, Ms. Dolan, and thank you for the congratulations. Probably at this stage I'll pass over. Don't know whether Jill or Colin wants to come in.
I'll go first. Yeah, I'll go first. It's a very good question. I've watched in DFC. I've been in DFC for a number of years. Just before I came across to finance 6 months ago, and we have quite a number of agency workers in doing DWP work here in the north. And there are conditions around that. So the contract with DWP only lasts for a finite period. That actually is a preventative mechanism for actually making those staff permanent NACS employees. That's something I think we need to continue to look at, and hopefully we can overcome at some point. Here, obviously, is at some stage that contract could be lost, and you could be left with a surplus of staff. That's the risk that is managed. So that's been a huge issue around all of that, and there are big numbers that come in into that. So there are very stark numbers of agency staff. In finance, for example, we have in LPS alone, we have over 100 agency workers in covering temporarily covering vacant posts. So part of our job is to try and catch up with where we need to be to get our resourcing levels, our staffing levels up to where our baselines are. I can't speak highly enough of the calibre and the quality of the work that our agency staff are doing for us. We always hope that whenever the opportunities become available on the open market, as they now do, that those agency staff will go for those and can compete very, very well with the insights that they will obviously have into the jobs. And we see the quality and the calibre of training that people get whilst they're with us is very, very high quality. So ultimately, we would like to see the numbers of agency staff coming down. We'd like to see the numbers of our permanent staff coming up. It ties in with Matthew's earlier question about the age profile of the civil service as well, because many of those agency staff are young people, and you'd like to see as many of them as possible come in and join the civil service permanently to help us change that age profile as well. But they're having to take their chances in the marketplace the same as anybody else who's out there who wants to have a go. But from a policy perspective, from a direction of travel perspective, do we want to have the same levels of agency workers as we currently have? No, we don't. We'd like to see that come down, but we'd like to see it coming down on a managed basis, where we do skill up and actually get better at how we do our workforce planning going forward. That's one of the big challenges that I mentioned earlier on, and that's difficult to get right, particularly where, for example, retirement ages are no longer set firmly, and it's much more difficult to predict when people will actually leave your organisation. Because as Jill said earlier, our turnover does tend to be low, so we just need to work our way through all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And you've sort of answered my second question, but it was basically around how do we ensure that agency staff who are doing the same job as permanent staff anyway, how do we ensure that they're given ample opportunity to apply for a full-time position, or that they're encouraged to do so?
Well, it's in some ways for agency staff, no matter where they're at in the civil service, it's like a dress rehearsal in many ways. So if you're good at doing the job, you're learning how to do the job. Whenever the job comes up, you'd hope you'd stand a very, very good chance of getting it. And albeit you're having to go through, because it's large-scale, big volume recruitment, you're having to go through like testing, psychometric tests, for example, that are set to do the selection. You have that plus interviews and all the rest of that to cope with. But that's the process that we have to use as a large-scale employer with 23,000 staff. So, but we do see conversion of a number of people who have been in with us temporarily through agencies coming on through on a permanent basis.
Thanks, Gemma.
No, thank you. That's my questions. Thank you.
Okay, Jim.
Yes. Good afternoon. 2 or 3 questions, if I might. To the head of the civil service, I take it you've read the RHI report?
Yes, Mr. Alistair, I have read the RHI report, yes.
And having read it, what do you think it did for public confidence in the civil service to discover that the sole disciplinary outcome imposed by the civil service was a single warning on one civil servant against the backdrop of the catastrophic failings that were found in the civil service?
Thank you, Mr. Alistair. Yes, I have read the RHI report, both in preparation for the process of applying for the role, as you might imagine, and the Audit Office report, and obviously subsequently. And I've also read the recommendations that came through from that. And as you say, it highlighted very significant and systemic issues in some cases across the service, with clear recommendations that came through as part of that. And I'm very committed to making sure that I play my part in terms of leading and addressing those recommendations. In terms of the process that was delivered, obviously there was a process with Cabinet Office, with an external panel, with an internal panel, and obviously the analysis through the RHR inquiry itself came over a number of recommendations. So it's not my position to comment on whether the actual process was right or not. That was adhered to.
Do you think the outcome of that process was confidence building?
I think the piece that will be confidence building from my perspective, Mr. Allister, is if we deliver, and when we deliver on those outcomes, if we
do you
take
think
those
there was
on
delivery
board.
on that occasion?
Pardon?
Do you think there was delivery in terms of building confidence that the civil service is capable of dealing with these disciplinary issues from the outcome that we actually had?
And I think, from my perspective, the inquiry itself, the output, if it wasn't to identify building confidence, it was to identify the areas where we needed to invest. It was obviously a very clearly defining moment of some very significant issues with the civil service. The Audit Office report actually backs up those recommendations, so those facts are really clear. We have a very significant programme of work to do. In my view, how we will build confidence is to say, okay, we accept those issues, which we have accepted at the executive level and with the colleagues around the table, and that we go ahead and we deliver a programme of work, short term, medium term, and those long terms. Our job now is to deliver better outcomes for the people of Northern Ireland, to take on board that and to address those deficiencies, of which there were many.
Well, let me put it to you a slightly different way. I'm sure this wouldn't happen in your case, but if as head of the civil service or a permanent secretary, you colluded with your political masters to ensure that notes weren't taken so as to thwart freedom of information, and that gave rise to a disciplinary approach, do you think that it would be suitable that simply by resigning, taking your pension with you, you could abort that disciplinary process? Or is that going to change?
We have clear processes and we have clear learnings that we're going to take through the RHI and both processes that we have in place. I will fully adhere to all the processes and procedures that are defined within the Northern Ireland Civil Service.
Are you going to change those processes? Are you going to change those processes to avoid that situation occurring again?
We are working through and we have delivered the programme of activities and the action plan that will deliver the recommendations of the RHI and both of the Audit Office report. I am very clear. I have a leadership role in terms of doing that, and I hold myself fully to account in terms of delivering on those recommendations.
I'm not sure if that's a yes or no answer to my question. Will you ensure that that scenario that I presented to you, that someone can abort the disciplinary process by merely resigning, will that or will it not be addressed? I don't think I've got an answer.
So I'm very clear in my role as the head of the civil service and also as a civil servant that the role for policy is for ministers to decide. I can advise and I can input, but ultimately the system only works if it is the ministerial role under whose direction I operate that will make that decision.
Well, okay, let me try a different topic since you mentioned ministers. Do you think we'll ever have a programme for government?
Obviously, we did a very significant consultation earlier in the year in terms of the Programme for Government framework, and we have developments going through. The Programme for Government is a critical aspect in terms of delivering our multi-year budget. The decision on timing of that is not for me as an official to work. I deliver the input and aspects we deliver through the framework, but ultimately it's for ministerial to define the timing of when that Programme for Government is delivered.
What sort of commentary is it on the dysfunctionalism of our system of government that we pass through an entire mandate without a programme for government?
You don't have to answer that, because as using the fantastic Father Tedism, that's probably an ecumenical question for that particular one, and it's not an issue of you wouldn't comment on a piece of policy. But if you wish to answer it, please do so.
I was just going to reflect on the same point. I mean, that isn't for me to make policy decisions. I'm really clear on where my focus can lie, and also in the divisions of responsibility that I have. And that's the only way the system can work, if I'm clear about those boundaries. I am not a minister or a politician. I have ultimate, very significant respect for people who put themselves forward, but that's not my responsibility.
Just slightly to digress, and sorry for cutting across you there, Jim. I mean, Jane, one of the things that you bring to this role is the fact that you've been out, to use the word, in the real world. You know, you've been in the business community, you see how things are doing. One of the issues, and again, this relates directly to the sort of the RHI issue and sort of the reform of the civil service. I mean, we talked about matrix management, and we talked quite a lot of the latest management speak and all the rest of it. But you have a programme for government that has potentially 43 deliverables with I don't know how many variables and outcomes and all the rest of it, with multiple reporting people through a matrix management structure. You know, bearing in mind your previous experience in the commercial world, I can't think of any successful business that would be producing 43 outcomes and multiple deliverables and no accounting officers or no responsibilities or multiple responsible officers. You would have something that was actually focused. And because you did use the language, I think it was quite useful. You said about attaching that to the budget. One of the things, of course, that the previous programme for governments never had was any budget attribution. There were no budget lines. There's no measures of effectiveness. There's no that. So taking it from the level of programme for government, which I'll not ask you to talk about, but I do need to say about sort of the Northern Ireland civil service reform. And, you know, it's all well and good talking about matrix management and the rest of it. But, you know, do we have 2 or 3 very key core deliverables that, you know, we can elucidate and say we are going to do those, and that will move it on? Because the more, if we have the reform of the Northern Ireland civil service looks like our programme for government, we're doomed for failure. It's not going to work. We've got to have something that is focused so that we can actually deliver. I mean, that's why I'm really pleased that you're in the role. We've got to be able to achieve that. So, you know, and I said earlier on, and sorry for cutting across Jim there, but so the question I asked is, you know, what's your mission statement? What's the plan?
Yes, and thank you. And programme for government will deliver, and of course there is the outcomes as part of that, but also we published the COVID recovery plan just a number of months ago, and the COVID recovery plan has 4 key themes. It's sustainable economy, it is green growth, it is health and wellness, and it is inequalities. And I guess those, for me, are the 4 critical themes. And we talked earlier about delivery and about the 10-year trajectory. So we're identifying a small number of very significant things that we need to focus on over a 10-year trajectory. And they tie into the COVID recovery, those themes, and they tie into the programme for government. But you're right, they create a focus and an outcome. So we're going through a process and discussing, but I'll give you a view of where my view is that those are. The first is we need to get to about a 12 billion increase in GVA in 10 years' time. That will bring us to a break-even perspective. That is about investing in high-growth, high-productivity sectors, but it's also bridging from that 27.1% economically inactive to around 24, 23%. Hard figures, that's tens of thousands of people moved out into delivering in that. So those are hard things that will actually bring us to a level of prosperity.
27 to 22, we can live with that. That's something we really need to see. Yep, okay. That's one.
So those are. Second is green growth. Okay, opportunity and a threat. We are largely in agri. I come from my husband's family's in a farming background, and he works in the sector itself. Very large agri sector, which actually is, it's almost the Silicon Valley of Northern Ireland because we know agri so well, but actually carbon emissions, big challenges for that sector. We need to get to around 42% reductions in carbon emissions in the next 10 years, and we need to do that joined up. So we talked about the economy. You need schools, you need communities, and you need economy, obviously, as a core linchpin of that productivity piece, and you need to deliver the fulfilment into health and justice and all those other aspects.
Yep.
DAERA, is the lead for that, but actually that needs to be delivered in terms of the energy policy and the economy. You need to build that sector. I truly believe actually Northern Ireland can lead in terms of some of those new green growth technologies. We've seen the hydrogen economy, we've seen organisations like Artemis. We are makers and builders and entrepreneurs. This is our big mission and challenge. Let's get behind it and provide opportunities. To do that, to challenge funds, there's joined up thinking, there's utilising funding east, west, north, south, internationally, how we get that, but that's where our target needs to be. Yeah. And the third piece I talked about earlier is those health inequalities, those 7 years differential from life expectancy, which feeds into also, talked about productivity in our actual public service, the inefficiencies because we have so many comorbidities over those areas. So we need to radically look at how we address those expectancies, but in particular with a mental health aspect, because actually when you look across all those areas of the pandemic, mental health and those impacted in the under 25s and those from diverse groupings are most significantly impacted. So those are threads across those. So if I was saying my 3 themes, those are my clear themes, and a singular focus and a determination that those are the things we're after. And of course there's political mandates on top of those, but those are the things that are foundations for doing whatever needs to be done from a political aspect or aspiration. That's getting the system working and providing more and better opportunities for the people that we serve.
Good. Jim, anything more?
Well, fortunately, Chairman, I didn't require a linkage between my last question of 5 minutes ago and my next. They were quite distinct issues, so I'll proceed to table it, ask it if I might.
Yep.
Under your leadership, will the civil service, unlike many other responsible bodies, continue to cling to be beholden to a political lobby group in regard to civil service matters? I'm referring to the linkage to the Stonewall Group, which is an active political lobbyist on all sorts of issues, and yet, courtesy of the civil service, marks its homework on those very issues. Are you going to continue with that practice, given that so many other public bodies, not least the Human Rights Organisation in Great Britain, has rightly decided that their independence is compromised by that attachment?
Thank you, Mr. Alistair. And we have obviously looked towards the engagement as part of that. Maybe I'll bring in my colleague Jill to advise of that analysis.
Well, we work with Stonewall along with a host of other organisations who advise us and assist us as we require. We're not beholden to them at all. We ask them advice. We sometimes utilise training for them. That is along with a host of other organisations like Employers for Disability, etc., etc. So huge range of organisations with whom we engage. We have entered into the workplace index that Stonewall runs, so that is around looking at, as an employer, how we sit as an employer in terms of LGBT practices. That is a voluntary mechanism, but it is something which has proved that as part of a wide-ranging diversity and inclusion plan is one element of it. And the Minister has agreed that we would continue to do so. I think, in terms of any sort of, as I said, there isn't an obligation on us. It's a choice of us as an employer. There have been some people who have withdrawn. There are still, as far as I'm aware, over 300 members of that Equality Index. Many government departments and across all of the other
jurisdictions. Do you recognise that the withdrawals have been because it is an overtly politically lobbying organisation, and many governmental and pseudo-government organisations have recognised that it compromises their objectivity if they are beholden, as you are, to such an organisation to tell you how you're doing. And of course, you pay them money for the privilege as well. You don't think that compromises the independence that someone might think should attach to the civil service?
Well, I can't, and I'm not going to comment on why other organisations have left. I don't know the rationale for it.
You haven't read of it?
No, I have read about it, but I'm not part of that organisation, and I don't, and I haven't spoken to them directly about it. I've probably read about it in the same way as you and others may have. But as I said, I'm happy to come back because I do have the numbers, have researched just how many organisations have left and how many organisations and government departments and the private and the third sector are still members of that. As I said, from my understanding, it's well over 300. And actually those, I also understand for those who have left, there's as many have joined. But as I said, it's a voluntary process.
Do you pay them money?
Yes, we do. We pay them I think it's around £2,000 a year, and for that we get to take part.
And they then tell you how you're doing?
Yes, that's correct.
To their standards?
Yes, in the same way
they
as
set your standards?
In the same way
they
as...
set your standards and they mark it over?
Jim, the witness has answered the question.
If you think so, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, Keith?
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jayne, for coming along and your team. Appreciate your answers so far, and you've covered a lot of stuff. I have a couple of questions relating to HR, maybe more just figures, etc., and maybe that's for you, Jill, or whoever wants to answer. You referred to currently 23,000 civil service, and picking up from Gemma's point earlier, you talk about agency staff, and you call them referred to about 100 roughly in LPS. What's the number of agency staff roughly on top of that 23,000, or does that include the 23,000?
I maybe pass over to Jill to comment on that.
I may have to come back with the exact figures, but I think we're sitting at around 23,500 staff, 10% of whom are agency workers.
Off that figure?
Of that overall figure, but I can confirm that for you, no problem, in the next day or two.
And that 23,500 then of what's that figure in comparison to before the voluntary exit scheme? Roughly, what was that figure back prior before the voluntary exit scheme? So we're now saying 23,500 roughly. What was that figure before that?
So let me just. I don't know the exact figure, but I do know that. Sorry. Let me get.
Are you okay? Whenever you're doing that.
No, you're grand.
Come back to this precise figure. We just recently reached the pre-VES levels again in our employment.
So we table a few figures on that.
You do that.
I apologise for putting you on the spot.
Can I just add one other wee thing as well, just on that? Right, we've been doing a bit of benchmarking work with our colleagues across the water as well, and we've seen the growth that they have had in their workforces over the last 5 years. And we can also provide you with that information because you'll see quite a significant level of growth, for example, in the English UK civil service, and you'll also see it in Scotland as well. Relative to ourselves, we've kind of gone the other direction a little bit. So we'll include those figures for you as well.
So that 10%, which is roughly 3,000, whatever it is, 2,500 roughly. Sorry, is a big number of agency staff. Mm-hmm. Not the size of an organisation. Does that worry you, considering cost?
It doesn't worry us in terms of cost. That's not really the issue. I think the issue, just in terms of one of the earlier questions, a lot of the agency staff are employed under because of particular business contracts that we have in terms of bringing in external work from the Department of Work and Pensions. So a lot of the agency staff will be in that area of work. That swells those numbers up. If that was permanent work, for example, permanent guaranteed work that might never end, the situation would be entirely different in terms of the numbers. So it does swell it artificially.
Colin, whenever you refer to cost, is it not more expensive than?
It's actually interesting. It swings and roundabouts because in a lot of ways it's cheaper to employ agency staff directly. But what you then do is you incur cost on the other side of it. If you lose agency staff, you leave to go somewhere else, and then you're in a retraining cycle. So it does catch you that way as well. So there are direct and indirect costs in terms of how that balances off.
Okay, you referred then just Jayne, at the start of your commentary about, you know, expertise and Militia referred to it earlier there. With respect to the HR function, do you do all the HR function internally, or is there any of it farmed out, for a better word?
Yes, there's some of from payrolls out. We do our payroll function is HR Connect does that on our behalf, and there's also elements of the recruitment process they do on our behalf.
So what's that like in comparison to other areas in the United Kingdom or around the world, that you have an organisation of 23,000 and I'm not reflecting on HR, I'm not running HR down, but you know that you farm some of that out? Can that not be held internally? Back to this point of expertise, and this is no reflection on Jill. Is the expertise not there, the staff not there, or what's the reason so much of that's farmed out, or is it a cost issue as well?
Maybe I'll make a comment just generally in terms of approach to outsourcing. So my view and direction will be is that all the strategic aspects where we need to be core and strong should be not outsourced. You know, we should have those really clear experts in the field within the service. But I think there is a model both for outsourcing for peaks and different demands and those which are non-strategic as well. So I guess just in general principle, we should be getting right-sized and removing more towards an in-sourced for those big strategic areas. Last column to respond in payroll. Yeah,
it's one of those areas where you have a lot of repeatable functions where you can outsource them. It's exactly the same point. You have repeatable functions which you can outsource and get them done relatively cheaply and get good value driven out of them. So that would have been the rationale for it.
But I suppose there's cost and there's expertise and there's speed. I suppose there's lots of issues in that. Colin, you referred to earlier, and Militia referred to it as well, like learning the new ways of working you referred to, and working from home. I'm not saying it doesn't work, but is it working, and do you get a better output? So obviously people are now forced home because of the pandemic, but if you go prior to the pandemic and you're now forcing people home because of it, but as your output is good, is it a better way of working? Yes, it works for the individual and works for the person, fair enough, and work-life balance, but is the output as good, and who polices those outputs?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of responsibility sits on the line manager in terms of doing that and the relationship you have with your staff, no matter where they're working. So in an organisation like the civil service, if you were saying to me, does it matter where my people work? No, it doesn't matter to me where my people work. What I'm interested in is what the outputs are and what the outcomes are getting, and that doesn't really matter whether you're processing a benefit or whether you're drafting a policy. You should be able to actually track what does good look like in terms of how long it's going to take someone to produce this, and what's the quality of it going to look like as well. So the metrics are relatively easy to establish. So whether someone's sitting in an office of 400 people right in front of you where you can walk around and you can hide in the crowd very, very easily, versus sitting at home with your own computer doing the work and you can actually see the metrics in terms of what's being produced, I actually think it doesn't make a difference, because it's down to the quality of line management. Whether a person's in the room with you or whether they're somewhere else doesn't matter. And I recall a very good boss I used to work for, and many years ago, said to me, "I don't care whether you work on the moon or where you do it, as long as you get it done." And he was expert, and we did working from home for him back in 2005, and he tracked it, and he knew exactly what to expect within a day, 2 days, whatever. So I think in terms of the performance management culture and ethos, that's where you get your productivity. Are we doing that uniformly, brilliantly across the piece? We haven't probably had a chance to really totally evaluate that, and I think that's part of what the challenge is going forward. But I'm looking at other organisations where they're wanting to go from things like a 5-day week to a 4-day week, and they believe in get the same productivity in 4 as they get in 5. I have people working directly for me who work on the basis of compressed hours. My goodness me, the productivity in those 4 days that they do is absolutely incredible. So they're doing their hours in 4 days rather than 5. Amazing. So it depends very much on the individual, their motivation, how well they're managed, what their expectations are, what gets measured gets done. If you follow that through, and it's scaling that up, Keith, to make sure that across all of the departments we're able to manage that in a consistent way, but in a way which reflects the very unique differences of the business areas that the different departments bring, because they're not all the same.
And I guess just to underscore that, the most important thing is that we deliver for the people of Northern Ireland. So that's the first priority, that we maintain those services, and then obviously we optimise to find the best working model to do that.
just been signalled by the chair he's doing this, and I don't know what that means. It's small. It must be a quick question. You referred, Jill, in one of your answers previously about a very low turnover within the HR. Why do you think that is? And I have my own thoughts on that. And what is it, as in percentage-wise?
Well, it's less than 5%, and again, I can give you the exact detail, follow up in the detail, but it's low compared to, you know, to other organisations, which in some ways is good because actually, you know, there are other jurisdictions that have real problem with their turnover. Like it's a real negative issue in terms of people leaving. But in terms of low turnover, I think there's all sorts of reasons. I mean, obviously, the public sector in Northern Ireland is a large employer, but also there was the change to the default retirement age, and there's also been changes to the civil service pension provisions, and ultimately we have good terms and conditions of employment. And also, I would like to think that people who work for the civil service have that ethos of wanting to provide, you know, a service to the people here and to the citizens here.
Yeah, and I suppose this is not a question, probably a comment. I think to be fair to you, Colin, the last time you here referred to a lot of good people in the civil service, and I think that perception is not out there. I'm not agreeing with the perception out there, but that's not out there. And you referred earlier, Jane, you looked on the hill. You probably didn't tell us all your thoughts whenever you looked up at this hill, to be honest. You probably didn't tell them all. You told us what you wanted to hear. You probably had other ones. But I think that perception's not out there, Colin.
Can I just come in on that? Because that's my perception as well. And it was, you know, coming in. And I think what we're not very good at is saying what the civil service is about and what the culture is within that, and telling the stories of the person in Laganweir doing, those people doing day and daily. So part of those analysis we've done is how do we get better at communicating outside? This is the best job in the world that I have, in honest. If I'm looking for a job that I can make impact in Northern Ireland, which is what I want to do, this is the best job in the world. But you look at our young people and my children who want to actually change the world. This is where you will change it for Northern Ireland. And there are really good terms and conditions to work in the civil service. So I want this to be the optimum company or organisation to go into when you're looking towards your opportunities. So we have a job of work to do that, to change that narrative. And we actually are not structured, even within the service. We don't have a strategic comms kind of piece about what is our long-term messaging, where is the consistency across that. So we need to really build that, because it's important that actually we're clear with our citizens that this is the journey we're on, and that actually we make this the best place from a perception perspective to work in Northern Ireland.
We have to market the brand very differently than we marketed it. We haven't sold the successes of what it's like to work here. We haven't sold, even the example you gave earlier, Jane, of the guys on the Lagan. We haven't sold those stories, what it's really like to work here, and the exhilarating difference that you actually can make. And many people do make it every single day. So we do need to think very, very differently about that. We are starting to get there with that. Okay, and I wish you well.
Thank you very much. Just a completely tangential, different question. You used to head up digital transformation, and you come from the IT sector, Jane. We have heard time and time again, problems with delivery of IT systems, and particularly within the Department of Finance, we've had some issues with IT systems, and particularly with sort of external contractors and actually delivery. You know, how confident are you? And you've mentioned it a couple of times about the skill sets. To get the right sort of people who can project manage that sort of thing, you're going to have to pay them a substantial amount of money and incentivise them to come and work with the Northern Ireland Civil Service. Do you think you've got the backing to do that?
I think digital transformation is a massive area for opportunity here in terms of modernising our services, and almost we have a perspective to actually leapfrog kind of beyond that, because some of our systems are quite old and clunky. And I do think, like, I've stepped up a small group of kind of digital techies around the service, and we meet on a Thursday morning, and you look towards what the health service have done in terms of, and Dan West coming in, really significant experience in terms of digital, and actually what that's done when you've created a framework for delivering those transformation pieces. So that is that talks to that innovation delivery piece. One of the big pieces is actually how do we get better at delivering those services as digital first element, and part of it will be working with the digital and data to analyse it and do that. I think you can make, we talked about consultancy and secondments, there is a very significant opportunity here to bring in those skill sets within the organisation, and we offer good terms and conditions in my view. You know, I came in here from that private sector background, but actually for those who want to fulfil and deliver those big, significant projects, and there are many out there, so I think we need to start. I think we need to get trial programmes, say this is the first thing we're going to do as part of this, and then we need to look towards, in those programmes, what are the one-off kind of capabilities you need to get consultants in to support with, but actually what you know, we would need to have a corporate memory for digital. We need to have people within the organisation, and we do have many, particularly in Department of Finance and the Innovation Lab and stuff that Iggy's doing as part of that. We just need to enhance that and shine a light on it and say this is a real area for opportunity and those digital strategies across the service, and not just, you know, ad hoc within departments and joining those up.
Okay. Jane, Colin, Jill, Bill, thank you very much indeed, and Jane, best of luck. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
We are here to help you.
Thank you.
It's not going to be easy, but we are indeed here to help you.
One very, sorry, Chair, I was trying to catch your eye. Can I just ask, sorry to drag you back into the cauldron, having thought you'd escaped, but or does this, Nix uses Prince 2 as a project management tool? When you have a, you as permanent secretary level people, you're assigned project and program management. Is there when it comes to civil service reform, is there a Prince 2 program strand, and who has that as the SRO?
So, and I've experienced...
Just very briefly,
Prince 2, I think that's a really critical point. Part of reform for me is breaking the system a wee bit. So I'm looking to see how we can look towards models more rapidly, following that from a software development methodology and agile, you know, a kind of a skunkworks methodology, because I guess looking towards how well has interdepartmental working worked, can we do some experimentation around different models of working and delivery, in addition to the Prince 2, which are thematic. So I'm very keen to explore alternative delivery models, more usefully emulating kind of what has happened in industry. And I guess that, you know, having a mission-centred approach, so specifying a problem, having individuals together to try and kind of the big smart people to try and work at that problem, and having a framework which allows them to fail more rapidly, but actually to inbuild that thinking. So part of my engagement is actually how can we transform some of our delivery? How can we trial things to do better in terms of that delivery model, outside, of course, of the big organisation structures, which is in terms of Prince 2 and that methodology? Yeah,
get Sue Gray to give us some money and say we'll do the experimentation on behalf of the United Kingdom here, so they can pay for it.
Well, just to add, we're already on this, for example, SROs, program directors, program managers are actively going through Cabinet Office programs in terms of getting accreditations to actually be accountable for the delivery of those kind of projects and programs that you're discussing there. Alongside of that, we're also going through accreditation programs as well around commercial development and commercial capability. So both of those things, we're very happy to write to you to confirm, let you give you a sense of how that's working.
There is a single program. Is there a single program in civil service reform with an SRO?
Sorry?
Is there a single program on civil service reform with an SRO, or is it multiple different programs?
Multiple different programs. There's SROs across a whole range of things. But what we're trying to do is get SROs to make sure they're all at the right level. Yeah. That the project population beneath them, in terms of establishing a project delivery profession, is one of the things the key things that come out of the RHI piece, which we're driving really hard at doing, and making sure that whenever you bring people in or have people existing in the NICS, get them trained up to the right level. So that linkage with Cabinet Office to allow us to do that has been a fantastic opportunity that we're really just starting to optimise now.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks very much indeed. Cheers, team. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Team, is there any other further actions we'd like to take forward? Any of this? I think there were some actions there that came through as we came through. So the people to write. Okay. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks, Jane. Thanks, everybody. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, item number 7, the Defamation Bill Committee Stage Oral Evidence. And do we have Mark available? Just give us a sec. Just let me get it sorted out.
think, Chair, you suggested last week was 3 questions.
Oh no, but sir, we were finished yesterday. There was only 45 minutes worth. We were last. Do we need to get some more time in? At least the people will be saying we're slacking. Can't have that.
4:10. Good luck to the next man coming in.
Long way from here to homeless.
Yeah, much too far.
That's what a coffee on the way.
No, thanks.
Atlantic type.
Come on, Mark.
Hi.
Yeah. Sorry for being a bit drift. We had the new head of the Northern Ireland Civil Service was in it with our team, so we had an opportunity to be a bit more expansive than we normally have been as well. Hi everybody, this is the committee stages oral evidence on the defamation bill. And welcome Dr. Mark Hanna from the School of Law at Queen's University, Belfast. Our briefing notes on page 251. Mark's response is page 259. The clause by clause of the bill table is at 268. The research paper on defamation is at page 306. And the defamation bill and explanatory financial memorandum is introduced as page 342. Over to you, Mark. That's right. I'll let you grab some water first then.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I understand you prefer if I open with 15 minutes and just say
as long as you need, and then you two got an opportunity. Yep.
Okay. Well, I don't really have anything prepared as such. I think I put a lot of my views in the response, and just to go over those again. I mean, I think that. Essentially, I understand this is a complex area of law, and I think there's a lot of things that need to be considered, and in ways there's too much that needs to be considered at one time. I do think that there is a chilling effect on free speech here with the defamation laws that we have in place currently. At the same time, I don't think that it's a massive chilling effect. I don't think that we are living in a totalitarian state or an autocracy or anything to that extent, but we could do better. And when you look at the law and you analyse the law, you can see
Mark, that. You said about the chilling effect, and we've had sort of evidence presented to the committee before about saying that there hasn't. How do you define that chilling effect? Because is there any sort of empirical data or anything you can say that there has been this chilling effect, or have you got any sort of? Have you put some meat on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's not is a simple answer, because how do you say on empirical level that the law is doing anything in society? There's too many things coming from different directions, and I did look at that question about whether it could be measured empirically. But there's really too much in the mix. You can talk about its general cultural issues that maybe lead to a chilling effect. Maybe it's the view that we generally have about reputation here in Northern Ireland. But what I did is, in order to try and measure this a bit, is to compare it with the changes that were introduced in England and Wales with the Defamation Act of 2013, and try to measure it up beside that. To see, what's the law been like here since 2014 when the Act was introduced in England and Wales, and how does it compare in relation to that jurisdiction? And that doesn't tell you exactly that it is a chilling effect, but you can certainly see that there is a difference there, and that you can make a reasonable supposition that the changes introduced in England and Wales have been introduced in order to balance the rights a little bit better and to make a bit more of a fine-tuning of the balance. So from that, I can only surmise really that that the law here is continuing to have a chilling effect. And when you look at it in some detail, it's hard to escape the conclusion, even if you can't prove it on an empirical basis. I mean, there's many things we can't prove on an empirical basis, but it's hard to escape the conclusion when you look at it in detail that it wouldn't have a chilling effect to some degree. And as I said at the opening there, it is only maybe a modest degree that it is having a chilling effect, but it's having some nonetheless. And I think that something could be done to fix that, and I would wonder why not. Why not take the action at this opportunity to do so?
Okay, thanks. Yep.
Yeah, no, I was just going to continue on and saying that, you know, I think there's many different aspects of this bill that, you know, that each require significant consideration. I wrote in my response that the issues for me are really revolve around the Clause 11, the reversal of the presumption of jury trials, the Clause 1 on serious harm, and Clause 4 on the public interest. I think if the bill does nothing else, that at least could do those things, and that would be a beneficial change. And I think that that would do something to get closer to having a finer balance of the rights involved. And finally, I would say that, you know, you can't look at defamation only through a legal prism, and that might sound strange coming from me because I come from a legal background as a lawyer and I work in a law school. But I think
Mark,
that
just so we can get it on the record, because obviously we record this for Hansard and it's part of the process that we go through. Could you actually just, for the record, sort of speak to the clauses 4, 11 and 1? And you also said something about Clause 7 in your written submission as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'll deal first with Clause 7 because my understanding that's the most straightforward. I'm not sure because there's a real legislative thicket around that issue of privileges for reports and summaries and whatnot. From what I understand, there was already reform in that area introduced in the 2010 Northern Ireland Order. I forwarded details in that on my response, and what I saw in that piece of legislation is that there is some coverage there already of privilege for reports and whatnot, but it did not include summaries. And my point was that I think that, you know, if that still needs to be done, perhaps Clause 7 in its entirety isn't necessary because a lot of those changes are already in place. But certainly I think if the change is made, that it should include summaries also. Okay. I'll start also with Clause 11 because I think it's the most important in relation to jury trials. In my research and looking at the effect that jury trials were having on defamation claims in Northern Ireland is quite profound, and I realise that Dr. Andrew Scott came to the same conclusion in his consultation report and in his 2016 report that jury trials were having that profound effect in Northern Ireland. What's interesting is actually comparing it with what had happened in England and Wales from 2010 onwards. We started to see the English courts moving away from jury trials because they were realising what the problems were for jury trials in defamation claims. And I was surprised that even though that Northern Ireland is its own jurisdiction, but a lot of the time it will follow the English jurisprudence. But that was one area where that has not happened, and there's a pronounced favouring of jury trials here in defamation claims. And that has certain effects. One of them is that it really kicks things into the long grass and leads to a lot of complexity in the trials and escalates costs. And as the Northern Ireland Law Commission recommended in its 2014 report, there should be reform because what they saw is that actually the effect of that is that it's weighing heavily on defendants and it's causing defendants to settle. And when you think about the defendants when they're faced with the prospect of litigation and a defamation action and that it's going to be a drawn-out matter in terms of a jury trial, then it makes sense for them to come to a conclusion quickly, well, let's settle the thing, and rather than getting into engaged in the costs and the protracted litigation. There's other inflections of the problems of jury trials in relation to Section 1, or rather Clause 1 and Clause 4 as well. I'll not get into those now. I just wanted to say that I realise that juries is a sensitive issue in Northern Ireland because of the troubled past and because of the issue with diplock courts and things like that. And again, that was something that Dr. Andrew Scott revealed in his report, that there was that sensitivity to it. But we have to realise that the virtues of jury trials is simply not transferring over into defamation claims. If our concern for having juries in defamation claims is about having the ordinary right-thinking member of society judging on these matters, or that it's about ensuring that judges aren't making decisions, unelected judges aren't making decisions, we have to realise that very few defamation trials actually lead to a jury being impanelled. I was speaking to a senior barrister last week who practiced in defamation claims, and asked him had he ever seen a jury impanel in defamation claim, and he told me he saw them at the back of the courtroom, but he's never actually seen them being impanelled. So again, what's happening is that typically defendants are settling the case before it ever gets to that point. And if you read through the case law, you'll see it's the judges that are making decisions on a lot of these defamation cases and a lot of these factual questions, which typically should be left to juries, but they're not. So the theory is there that juries could have this democratic effect on defamation law, but in fact and in practice, it's just not happening. So when you consider that, beside the fact that juries are leading defendants to settling and are having this chilling effect on free speech in that respect, and stopping us from striking a finer balance between the rights involved, you have to think, well, what's the point then? Is it really necessary? And is there really any virtue in holding jury trials and maintaining presumption in that respect? In terms of Clause 1, it surprises me, to be honest, about how much hysteria has developed around Clause 1 and this serious harm test. I think it's blown out of proportion a little bit. That maybe has something to do with the history of the legislation of Section 1, which it reflects in England, and the question going up to the Supreme Court and the show. But I think that a lot of those problems have been sorted out, and what we've seen actually is it's quite a modest clause in itself, really, the effect of it. And this idea that it would stop plaintiffs being able to bring cases for defamation, I don't see any evidence of it. I mean, I think you have to be clear that what Clause 1 is requiring is not a case that a plaintiff absolutely must show on a basis of evidence that there's been harm suffered. There will be some cases where it's not possible, and as I say in my response, the nature of reputation is a very fuzzy thing, so there will be situations where it's just not possible to show harm. And I think in those situations, the courts will make an inference of harm still. But what it does is it shifts the perspective away from a judge being ready to make a quick inference of harm, or rather a jury in this jurisdiction, to one where there's a bit more sensitivity to the facts. And asking the question, well, listen, has there actually been harm suffered? And as I say in the response, in a lot of the defamation claims here in Northern Ireland, which are decided and which damages are awarded for, the plaintiff will be able to show that. And I don't think that it introduces too much complexity into the case.
And you think we should have the serious harm test? Yep.
Sorry?
Yeah, we should have it. Yep.
I think we should have it, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. And number 7? Oh, 7.
Sorry, no, it's number 2 or 10.
Oh, sorry, 10. Yep. And sort of, again, I think you were already talking about the jury trial, but sort of in Clause 11, trial without a jury, to be amended in order to reflect the findings of the Gillen Review of Civil Justice, which suggested that judges have discretionary powers to select trial by judge only in the case of complex matters, and that judges should have discretionary powers to compel parties to undertake alternative dispute resolution or face financial penalties. So, your thoughts on that?
Well, I know that there is a discretion there, but when I looked at from 2014 onwards, I saw very little use of the discretion. And again, I was doing that in comparison with England, and I saw that from early, maybe 2000s, there was indeed a practice of using that exception to move away from jury trials. I could only find one case in my research in that time frame where it has been exercised, and unfortunately that was subject to a reporting restriction, which a lot of defamation cases are here in Northern Ireland also. So I would wonder why the judiciary do not make more use of the exception, but it seems that they don't. Again, I think that maybe the legislation is a way of amending that.
Okay, thanks. Obviously, one of the things that we've heard quite a few times is with the vexed issue of sort of websites and social media and hosting as well. I think Clause 5, where it says operators of website, do you think it's necessary? And why should operators of websites have an exemption or very significant limitation of liability when the term operators of websites is not defined? So, bearing in mind sort of a lot of the significant issues we're having with social media at the moment, what's your perspective on that?
do not think Clause 5 is necessary myself. I think, you know, what Scotland did is noteworthy in sidestepping that complexity, and I wonder why the same avenue is not available here. I think that things have changed in that regard since 2013 with the advent of social media and the explosion of social media and the way that social media provides a platform for people to be defamed so easily. I think that you have to bear in mind the online harms legislation that's pending as well, and that's what I meant in a sense about the defamation bill trying to do too much in some respects, and I wonder if some of those questions couldn't be handled there. This is not an area that I have researched in great depth, but my feeling is that I would be cautious about. I realise that social media companies have a lot of power now. I would be cautious about. Well, let me say, I think that their liability should be captured more, or perhaps a little bit more precisely than is reflected in Clause 5. Okay. Again, I'm not sure that it is necessary, but it's not an area that I can confess to know a great deal about.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. I'm sorry, I'm going down through the list of questions I have here for the rest of it. Should the defamation bill be amended in order to support and encourage the use of discursive remedies, including prompt and fulsome retractions, coupled with a let me say that.
Jurisdictional?
Can I say that again? Jurisdictional bar to a defamation action in these cases?
Well, in terms of corrections and retractions and apologies, I think yes. I realise the difficulty of imposing on the press and the media generally, or even publishers generally, an obligation in terms of retractions and corrections. I mean, in the HRH Sussex case, for example, the Daily Mail Online was ordered to publish a front page retraction or correction, and that hasn't happened yet. And it itself gets kicked into long grass of appeals and things, and the press are resistant to it, and they have some reason maybe for doing so, for going back and forth in stories and whatnot. My own thoughts about the role of retractions and corrections and apologies is specifically in relation to the public interest defence. I think that there's maybe scope for including it in Clause 4 specifically, in terms of whenever a publisher or defendant publishes a story that's false, yes, and they later learn that it's false, there should maybe be an obligation on them, or that should reflect in the defence itself somehow, that, you know, if they realise it's false and they realise their mistake, that they should issue an apology or retraction at some point, and that should be not only coming in at damages but coming into the defence as well. In terms of the jurisdictional questions, I don't think that it's quite the issue it is that it was for London. I mean, this is not London, and we don't maybe have the jurisdictional nexus that place does as a global city. So I don't know if there's really a lot of forum shopping goes on here with Northern Ireland, and certainly, again, that was a conclusion that Dr. Scott came to in his report, that it wasn't really a pressing issue for Northern Ireland.
There wasn't a degree of sort of litigation tourism. Yeah.
And I haven't seen it myself either, no.
Okay, just another question. Some respondents have suggested that Clause 1, which is the serious harm one, should be further strengthened in order to include provisions which prevent companies or public authorities from bringing defamation actions. They argue that the protection of reputation is deemed necessary because it impacts on personal identity and psychological integrity. Such a justification should not apply to any kind of company or public authority. Could you just give us some of your perspective on that?
Well, my understanding was that Clause 1.2 did actually refer to bodies of trade for profit, so I'm not sure if I'm mistaken in that. And in relation to public authorities, I think that that's covered by the common law, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, is there a necessity to legislate on that? I think I'm not sure there's a great debate about that, the authority of that common law position.
I think that's quite clear.
Okay, thanks, Chair, and thanks. Are you happy enough with Mark?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Super. Mark, you just referred in your conclusion here, your report, you talk about value-free speech and you referred to societal conflict, and obviously you referred, to be fair, in your notes about conflict in Northern Ireland. We all know what that is, or was, still is to a degree. is there going to be a chilling effect, and is there not free speech in this country? And what's the difference between free speech and lies? You know where I'm coming from. You know, so it's not okay to publicise anything you want about me or anybody else, as long as it's the truth. You mightn't like the truth, but it's the truth. So what's the difference between free speech and lies?
Well, I mean, there is never, they say there is never really a public interest in making false statements. I think there is a small category of certain types of speech where there can be a mistake and it is a false statement, and still there is a public interest and the law should protect it. And that's in relation to what's called here the Reynolds defence and the public interest defence. And there's very, strict circumstances around what will qualify for that. In more general terms, I think in terms of a lot of the communication that's bandied about now that is false, it's not really speech that you would call high-value speech that maybe the legislation should step in to protect in that respect. And I think that that's probably the complex task that you have before you, that you have to ensure that there is some kind of protection of what you would say is public interest speech and maybe is even false, and in such a way that it doesn't tip the scales too far.
What's high-value speech?
Well, I mean, public interest speech has got to do with political institutions, public life and things like that. So things that would qualify under the Reynolds defence and what would become the public interest defence under Clause 4 of this bill. There's no bright line test to what qualifies by that. I think that it's sensible enough. You'll know it when you see it. But if you're referring to a lot of the things that maybe are posted on social media now and misstatements that are made there, I think that there's nothing in this bill that's going to actually allow that to escape any kind of defamation claim that I can see. This bill, as far as Clause 4 is concerned anyway, and false statements, is really only relating to public interest speech and speech that is published in some kind of reasonable conduct.
And the Chair referred to Clause 5, Mark, about websites, etc. Is that clause of any benefit to a political representative or someone of whatever that gets commented on social media? Does this bill have any protection or assist that person? Because if an individual, falsehoods is said on social media, whether it's harm, serious harm, it has an effect. We're in this place, we're obviously legislating to protect everybody, but then we're going to legislate now to let people say what they want.
Well, again, I mean, I'm not sure if Clause 5 is absolutely necessary myself. I do think that, again, what's changed since 2014 is the explosion of social media. I think that there has to be a realisation that, yes, there's a lot of harm done through posts on social media, but at the same time, I think that it's worth bearing in mind that there's a kind of a cultural realisation now that a lot of the things that are written in social media are untrustworthy, and there's a lot of fake news out there, and I think that you have to credit the public in general for realising that and taking a lot of what they hear in social media with a pinch of salt. How far they do so is difficult to say, but I think that enters into this as well. And I think that certainly the legislature should consider that when they're considering this bill. But again, I can't say too much about operators of websites, and because it's not an area I've looked in great detail at, so I can't really comment at great length on it.
Or just for the record, could you just sort of outline, in a nutshell, the Reynolds case?
So the Reynolds case, it was former Taoiseach Albert Reynolds brought a case against the Times because they had alluded to some corrupt dealings that they thought that he was having, and he brought a case against the Times on that basis. Before that, in the law, there was what's called a duty interest privilege, which meant that typically it's for writing references. You couldn't be sued for defamation if I make a defamatory statement in a reference that I wrote for somebody, because I had a duty to do so and the recipient had an interest in receiving it. That was the only privilege that existed in the common law at the time. The Reynolds case came along in 2001, just as the Human Rights Act was coming into force, and you started to see a bit of a change in judicial thinking then, realisation there was some kind of criticisms coming from Strasbourg that the UK law, the law in England and Wales was having a chilling effect on free speech, and I think that the judges were alive to that, and what they tried to do is to fit, to protect the Times, or to certainly to allow for some editorial discretion and allow for media outlets to make statements that are false and give them some kind of defence, but they tried to fit it into this duty interest sort of thing. It's a bit awkward, and it took a few cases to work out, and to be honest, it wasn't perfect. The judicial workings out weren't perfect in the end. That's why I think that Section 4 was necessary, which states it in a more simple language. So that, in a nutshell, was really the Reynolds case.
Sorry about that, Keith. Sorry.
No, I'm fine if there's anything else. Thank you in the meantime, Mark. Appreciate that. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair.
Matthew?
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for your written and your oral evidence so far. I suppose in general terms, you say in your written evidence that you endorse or recommend the bill, and that it strikes at a more equal and precise balance between the rights of the right of people to protect themselves from falsehoods, defamation, etc., and the right to freedom of expression. I missed, unfortunately, because I popped out for a second, your any initial remarks, but could you explain in summary, why you think that is?
Well, I mean, I limit really my comments to clause 1, 4 and 11, and as I said at the opening, I think the big thing for me, from my perspective, is a reversal of the presumption of jury trials, because I think I agree with the Northern Ireland Law Commission report recommendation that the presumption be reversed, and I agree with their conclusion that it was having a profound effect on defamation laws. It was weighing heavily on defendants, causing defendants to settle too much. I looked at the law since 2014 in this jurisdiction, and you can see that again. I've asked for a freedom of information request on the number of cases that actually opt for a jury trial and the proportion of those that settle. But we know in general that Northern Irish defamation case has a high proportion of settlement. And again, the Scott report really underlined that as being problematic, and they said that doing away with jury trials was probably one of the basis for overcoming that. I talked about this issue with juries being a sensitive issue in Northern Ireland, and saying that actually in practice it doesn't really bear fruit that we hoped it would. It ends up being judges that take most of the decisions in defamation claims all the same, and juries are rarely impanelled in the end. Even at the minute, juries are actually rarely... Yes, yeah. Juries are rarely impanelled, and it's because juries is kind of like the last step for a jury to be impanelled. Its cost, its complexity for organising juries. In that respect, what tends to happen before that it ever gets to that stage is somebody will get nervous and settle, and generally that will be the defendant. So that is the issue, and that's the chilling effect right there. And it has effects in terms of clause 1 as well, and the serious harm test. I mean, what juries are doing is actually postponing any kind of harm test being applied in Northern Irish defamation cases until the jury comes to that stage where it's a jury's impanelled. So if a jury's involved, and most plaintiffs will, as a matter of strategy, I think, opt for a jury trial. If a jury's involved, it means all the judge can ask is a defamatory meaning? Is the statement complained of capable of bearing a defamatory meaning, which is much lower threshold than asking, is there any kind of harm suffered? And by the way, we should note that actually under the common law, there's supposed to be a harm test. It's not one that asks the plaintiff to prove on a factual basis that harm has been suffered, but there is a requirement that they show that there's an inference of substantial harm nonetheless. But we never get to that stage, even because of that, because of this presumption of jury trials. And then the final point I make is in relation to clause 4 in the public interest defence. There's never been a successful public interest defence in Northern Ireland. I've not found one anyway, and I would love for somebody to tell me otherwise, but I've asked quite a few people who should know, and nobody can actually point to one. There has been refusals to strike out on that grounds, but no affirmative definition of the public interest here, defence in Northern Ireland. And I think that that's a shame. Are we saying that there's never been public interest speech here in Northern Ireland? That there's never been a viable defence? I think there has often been, but what happens is typically it's parent companies of media outlets that are located in London or Dublin who just decide that they can't be bothered with the trial and it's too costly and it's too complex, so it's easier for them to settle.
So now, this comes to a point where about data. You said about so there are multiple data points that we just don't have. What data are you using to stand up your arguments?
Yeah, and that was also something I addressed at the beginning. Listen, I don't think that you're ever going to get a 100% empirical statement that here we can see exactly that the law is having a chilling effect. What I looked at in my own research was I did a comparison with England and Wales with Northern Ireland since 2014 in relation to the presumption of jury trials, the serious harm test and the public interest defence. And that's not to say that England's ideal. It's got its own issues and everything. But it is to say that, listen, what they tried to do with the 2013 Act was to make a finer balance. And I think that it's hard to debate that they did not achieve some striking of a finer balance between the rights involved. So I used that as a kind of metric to measure up what was happening in Northern Ireland. And for me, what it revealed is that, we could do more. Yeah. We could certainly do more to strike at that balance. And as I said in the response, that is the gold standard now for defamation law around the world, that it strikes a balance of the rights.
2012 or 2013 one in England?
Yes.
When you did that, what were you specifically comparing?
I was looking at how specifically, well, it was actually from 2010, in the law, in legislation and in the common law, how those issues have been dealt with. So we have a harm test here also. How is it operating in the Northern Irish courts? And compare that with how it is in the English courts before and after the 2013 Act. And the same thing for public interest defence. We have a public interest defence, apparently. So do they. And the same thing in terms of the presumption of jury trials, how it operates there, how it operates here.
Was that then a kind of sort of textual comparison of what the law says, rather than a sort of court date, rather than a comparison of actual judgments?
No, it's a comparison. A look at a doctrinal legal approach, looking at the judgments and reading the judgments, and reading their interpretation of the legislation.
Right. Okay. And in general, not an area I'm hugely au fait with, so I don't want to. But that comparison would show you that the balance that you're talking about is more heavily weighted through your kind of textual study of what judges say and the advice judges give to juries is more heavily weighted against the freedom of speech here than it is in England.
It's not a matter of the advice that judges, the instructions that judges give to juries. It's more a matter of what the practical realities of what a presumption of jury trial is causing here. My understanding is a lot of plaintiffs who come with a defamation case to a lawyer, the lawyer will say, listen, it's up for a jury trial, because it's likely the defendant probably will get nervous and maybe will get a settlement before it ever gets to any kind of test in court in that respect. So that, I think, is really the issue with jury trials rather than the instructions that they're getting from judges.
Do we know, is it possible to say whether in Northern Ireland we are a tiny percentage of the population of England and Wales, but there are proportion, can you do it on a kind of population basis? Are proportionately fewer writs issued here? Or more writs, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to compare because, again, London is a completely different place in terms of libel law and things like that. Obviously, there's a lot more happening there. There's a lot more
economic activity there.
Right.
A lot more.
Yes, and there's more jurisdictional connections with the rest of the world, and you will maybe get foreign business people who are bringing cases there and things like that. Maybe we don't have those issues so much here. So I think that it's hard to say that, but one point that's worth making in that respect is that, when you look at the judgments in Northern Ireland, commonly they will refer to English cases a lot, but what the 2013 Act effectively achieved here is fossilising the law in Northern Ireland, because now we're left in a bit of a cul-de-sac and we don't have that rich jurisprudence to refer to. And it's just because their courts are so busy and there's so many issues being tested there that they have to make judgments on it. And now we've kind of locked ourselves out of being able to refer to that.
Okay, interesting, okay, right. Okay. That was so the fact that the law has been updated in England and Wales and is no longer a judge here, an NI judge cannot refer to that jurisprudence because they're so different.
Right. I mean, we don't have a Section 1 serious harm test, so a lot of the courts have been taken up with that issue, since 2014. So now we don't have any further development on the common law issue of substantial harm. So really what we're locked in Northern Ireland is a reference to English law about 2010, or maybe even in some respects before that, and before the Human Rights Act really kicked into force. And I think that that's an issue for concern.
Thank you, Matthew. Any others? Okay, Mark, thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Yep.
That's given us a lot of sort of food for thought. So do you mind if you want us to, if there's any other further sort of follow-ups that might come afterwards, do you mind if we write to you so you might be able to come back and inform us of that?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much indeed for your time, and sorry for us starting slightly late.
That's no problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, team, any other actions we want to take? Okay, just one. Members are asked to consider correspondence from the Department at page 3 of the tabled items. The Department suggests that the Committee seeks the views of the Shadow Civil Justice Council on a number of matters relating to the discretionary power of judges and the use of alternative dispute resolution mechanisms. Are we content to do so? Agreed?
Yes.
Is the Committee content to write the sponsor of the bill into the Department and seek the responses and all the relevant commentary made by stakeholders in the call for evidence and captured in the questions on page 252 and 253? Are we agreed? Agreed. Is the Committee also content to invite the Department and the bill sponsor to provide oral evidence in this regard just prior to informal clause-by-clause scrutiny? Agreed. Next item on the agenda, item number 8, written briefing GRO fees amendment order. Members are asked to consider the Clerk's note at page 379 and Statutory Rule 299, the General Registry Office Fees Amendment Order Northern Ireland at page 380. The rule is subject to negative resolution and will come into operation on the 7th of December 2021. It will introduce a nil fee for the signing of a conversion declaration by a same-sex couple to convert a civil partnership to a marriage and by an opposite-sex couple to convert their marriage to a civil partnership. The Committee considered the related SL1 at the meeting on the 10th of November 2021. The Committee divided and a motion was passed that the Committee has no objection to the policy intent and was content for the Department to make the rule. The Department have advised that the rule does not deviate from the original proposals.
Mr. Chairman, once again, could I lodge my extreme opposition to this? I think I outlined it the last time why I would oppose to it, and I remain implacably against anything that binds traditional marriage between one man and one woman. Okay,
so noted, but do you wish to go to a vote?
No, I think we've had a vote already. I suspect it may be the same numbers.
Okay. Therefore, noting from the comments from Mr. Wells, members, therefore, the Committee for Finances considered Statutory Rule 299, the General Register Office Fees Amendment Order Northern Ireland, and subject to the report of the Examiner, Statutory Rule has no objection to the rule. Is this agreed?
Delighted to.
Agreed.
Not agreed.
Well done.
Next item, written briefing pensions direction. Members are asked to consider the Clerk's note at page 386. The relevant papers are as follows. Pension direction letters from the Department of Finance at page 387. Departmental correspondence TUS regarding cost cap directions, page 389. Pension cost cap valuation statutory rule at page 391. The GAD 2016 valuations presentation at page 400. The direction appears to refer to the Public Sector Pension 2016 valuation process, which was paused pending the passage of the McLeod remedy legislation. It was the subject of a legislative consent motion which the committee reported on and the Assembly passed in September-October 2021. The directions have no Assembly procedure. Are we content to note? Therefore, the Committee for Finance has noted the Public Service Pensions Valuation Employer CAS-COP Amendment Directions Northern Ireland 2021. Are we agreed? Agreed. Moving on to correspondence. Correspondence index. Members are asked to note the index of 11 received items corresponds to page 414. First up, qualification of departmental annual reports and accounts. Members are asked to note page 417 a ministerial response advising that notice of the qualification of accounts was provided promptly. And indicating instances where qualification of accounts has occurred for other departments. Are we content to note? Okay, note. Okay. Department of Finance 2021 annual reports and accounts. Members asked to consider at page 421 a written departmental briefing paper on the Department of Finance annual reports and accounts. This paper was to be considered at the ministerial briefing last week, but was not considered as the session had to be rescheduled. The paper explains the background to the qualification of accounts and indicates that some localised restriction support scheme payments have been made ultra vires and that legislation may be brought forward shortly to address this. That's another piece of retrospective legislation, but I think it's a different category to where we are. Is the committee therefore content to write to the Department for Finance seeking a timeline for the LRSS legislation? Agreed. Next item is COVID support overpayments. Members are asked to note at page 445 correspondence from the Department of Finance providing a table showing that this was the thing you were asking for, Keith?
Yeah.
Showing the level of overpayment, recovery, fraud and write-off of COVID support schemes. Write-off for LRSS appears to be just under 1 million. Are we content to note? Content? You happy, Keith?
Yeah.
Okay. LPS fraud, legal proceedings. Bearing in mind we've had briefings of this in camera before, team. Members are asked to note at page 450 correspondence from the Department providing an update on the outcome of a court case relating to a significant LPS fraud. Are we content to note?
Chair, just obviously just before my time, I presume that was an internal employee within LPS?
Yes, it was.
Doing whatever he was doing, or she?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Are we content to note?
Thanks.
Yeah, it's agreed. Next item, special advisors disciplinary proceedings. Members are asked to consider at page 451 a departmental response declining to provide information on disciplinary matters relating to special advisors. The department indicates in the event that the committee is able to establish a legitimate interest in such a matter, the department would consider the The department would consider the request for information in light of Article 8 of the Convention as set out in the Human Rights Act 1998, data protection legislation and common law rights to confidentiality. Do members have any views or comments?
Chairman, first of all, it's up to us to decide whether we feel we have a role or not. It's not up to the department to decide. Secondly, given the enormous damage that irresponsible special advisors from all parties, excluding the SDLP, from all parties behaved in the RHI debacle, we have a very clear and important role. This is an attempt to stop us finding out information which the department will feel uncomfortable about. I think we need to dig our heels in and demand that they give us this information. We're not happy with the response.
Any other comments? Well, thank you, because you seem to have anticipated precisely what I was going to say, Mr. Wells. Thank you very much indeed. Therefore, is the committee therefore content to write back and indicate that it's not for the department to decide what or what isn't a legitimate interest for a committee for finance? I think we could also suggest that the department seeks the agreement of all the SPADs to the provision of this information, because I think that would, I'm sure the SPADs and the entirety of openness and transparency would be willing to do so. I can think of at least.
Well, I think it's also making the point, Chair. We're not asking for personal information.
No,
We're asking for more general information about whether this. Yes.
Yep. And the committee might also offer on this occasion only to receive anonymised information which would protect the identity of any special advisors affected. I think that would be acceptable.
Yes.
Agreed. I think that would address the concern the department seems.
Indeed. Thank you. Next item, the unique circumstances funding. Members are asked to note at page 453 a TEO response to the committee's request for for breakdown of the allocation of funding under the NDNA, unique circumstances, initiatives and timing of the related allocation. TEO has declined to provide the information, arguing it is a matter for the Northern Ireland Audit Office, the Northern Ireland Office, which previously declined to provide this information. It appears that the FM and DFM sign-off for this spend was a political rather than an executive agreement. The Department of Economy have advised that the Department of Finance have sought related bids from departments, and the committee has already written to the Department of Finance seeking sight of these bids. Anybody wish any comments? Go ahead, Matthew.
But, I suppose we'll just make the general comment that it sort of reinforces that these tranches of money tend to have this sort of weird limbo or kind of status, which is like, so for example, when we get tables, I'm not sure about NDNA funding, but when we get tables on updated monitoring rounds or budgets, we will often get tables which talk about fresh start funding and sometimes NDNA funding, confidence and supply funding. Now, it's not completely consistent the way they're presented, but the implication is that there is a kind of agreed basis on which this money, that there are these agreed pots which exist, but then when you ask about them, they don't seem to. So there's just this kind of question about what is the, in a sense, what's the legal status? I don't know if that's a naive question, but clearly there's an ongoing tussle, dialogue between the Department of Finance and the Treasury, for example, most recently over the spending review and what the baseline was. That's sort of fair enough. That's a part of whether it's good or bad, it's part of the devolved spending settlement we have to work with. But these kind of tranches of pots of money, it would just be, I would be interested to find out what's the department's view of their status, if you see what I mean. Are they just gentle persons agreements, but they don't seem to be particularly well observed, or what? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I'll just refer to and again, may I sort of commend the Northern Ireland Fiscal Council for the Public Finances Northern Ireland, a comprehensive guide. Well, one of the things that they refer to is the lack of transparency and understanding where various monies are. I think the fact that we as the Finance Committee are charged for looking at sort of the finances of Northern Ireland and the Government of Northern Ireland and how it is managed, and the fact that it may or may not be political, I don't think is necessarily the question. It's the fact that we should have oversight or a degree of understanding of where these finances are. Because, I must admit, I tend to, even though I look at the documentation assiduously and sort of read all the briefings that come through, but I have an issue as well with trying to understand where that's coming from, and quite frankly, I'm not really happy with that response. So I think we should write back to both the TEO and the Department of Finance and say, while you're declining to provide the information, and you're saying you're arguing it's a matter for the Northern Ireland Office, I would think it would probably be appropriate that the information was provided in the case of, for the sake of openness and transparency, which of course we've just heard the new head of the Civil Service, Northern Ireland Civil Service, said that she was committed to. And it's all part, and I think it all comes under part and parcel of comes under her remit as well. So I would quite like to sort of write to them on behalf of the committee to ask them to reconsider their view. Are we agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much indeed. Next item on the agenda is the Fiscal Council. Members asked to note on page 459 correspondence from the Northern Ireland Fiscal Council informing members that will write to the committee on the 22nd of November on the spending review. It also informs members of plans to publish its comprehensive guide to Northern Ireland public finances, which we've seen, and I met informally with them on yesterday. The relevant correspondence at page 9 of the tabled items. The Fiscal Council letter indicates that the spending review is largely on trend with previous non-COVID increases to the Northern Ireland Block grant. It also indicated the long-haul APD arrangements will increase the losses to the Executive from almost nothing to 2.45 million.
Well, Chair, I would just say, if I may, on that, that we have at least one MLA who's willing to constantly beat the drum for not spending £2.5 million a year on non-existent long-haul flights. But I would also say, if I could also raise the banal point of, are other members of the Finance Committee able to get hold of hard copies of this report?
think one was given to the chairperson.
No, indeed, I'm not asking.
That's the only one.
Can we have yours and read it?
On the interest of openness and transparency, as your chairperson, I did ask them to produce, if they could produce 90 copies to give to every MLA in the Assembly, because actually having read for half of it, it is a pretty good document. And whereas we as a committee are well used to the great work that RAISE do, and we have a good oversight of some of the funding and finances, I think it should be required reading for every MLA, quite frankly. And indeed, quite a few members of the civil service as well.
I'll try and get hard copies for members.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. Or we might actually ask I wonder if the library could...
I'll contact them. I'm sure they've got them, so we'll sort that out.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Is the committee content to note? Agreed. EU update. The committee was asked at page 460, notice of the first meeting of the Trade Specialist Committee on Level Playing Field for Open and Fair Competition and Sustainable Development. This is part of the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement that took place on the 12th of October. The committee considered the UK subsidy bill. Are we content to note? Noted. Generating electricity from renewable energy. Members asked to note at page 467 a memorandum of reply to the PAC report on generating electricity from renewable energy. The Department of Finance accepts recommendations around the treatment of evidence for invested interests, engaging with GB bodies when adopting GB legislation, and the sharing of information across departments in respect of the development of new policies. Jim, want to say anything? Okay. Committee is therefore content to note. Agreed. Youth Assembly for Northern Ireland. Members are asked to note on page 476 correspondence informing members that the Youth Assembly committees have been established for education, environment, health and rights and equality, and will be interacting with relevant committees. Are we content to note? Indeed. There was a letter from 478 from the head of the civil service asking to reschedule her appearance, but that's been overtaken by events. Are we content to note? There was a DERA webinar. Members are asked to note correspondence of table 20 of the tabled item from the Committee for Agriculture regarding a ministerial webinar on the green growth strategy to be held on the 29th of November. A link is provided. Are we content to note? Agreed. Composite request is page 128. Are we agreed? Are we happy with that? Excellent, thank you. Moving quickly on to the forward work programme. Draft forward work programme is page 497. Members are asked to note that the Fiscal Commission is to brief on the 19th of January 2022, and they will provide the committee with a copy of the report the day before its release. Okay, happy with that? Content to note? Agreed. And the draft forward work programme now extends to the end of the mandate. It now includes briefings which are to be confirmed from the Procurement Board on the Department of the 2021 Budget Bill. Are members content with the forward work programme as amended? Agreed. Agreed. Okay. Is there any other business? Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, team. Thank you. Brings us up to 1700. Next meeting, 1st of December at 1400 here in the Senate Chamber. I hereby switch off the red light. Thank you very much indeed.
Senate Chamber, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber, programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber